Chapter 449. Xiaoqing sneered. Then you are not afraid of me? Master is a good person, I can see it. The young boy approached cautiously, and then knelt down at Xiaoqing's feet. I am very good and obedient. I will do whatever the director wants me to do. I just want to stay with Master. Yin Qiyu sneered and kicked him away. She hugged Xiaoqing. Go away. The young boy quickly said, I will not have any improper thoughts. I just want Master to give me a place to stay. Xiaoqing thought about it. She was going to leave here soon. It was okay to keep the young boy for a few days. She said, forget it, just think of it as hiring a part-time worker. So when they came out there were 5 people. And when they went back there were 6 people. The young boy's name was Mochizuki Baishui. Generally speaking, he was more tactful. After he was taken back, he was very obedient. He only did some cleaning in the yard and housework. He did not deliberately get close to Xiaoqing. Of course, this was also related to Yin Qiyue's close watch. The injuries on his body were not light. Xiaoqing did not want him to die like this, so she gave some medicine to Ito Jumiko, and asked her to apply some medicine on Mochizuki Baishui when she was free. The relationship between the two began to improve. Ito Jumiko treated Mochizuki Baishui as a younger brother. Xiaoqing got the pass and was ready to leave. The reason why she did not leave immediately these 2 days was that the medicine that Air Dai usually took was gone. Yin Qiyue made it on the spot, so she stayed for 2 more days. These 2 days, she went out every day and found a group of people to beat up. This way, she would be in a better mood when she came back. After all, the atmosphere was too oppressive. She saw too many things that made people feel angry. If she did not vent, it would accumulate for a long time and not be good for her body. It could be said that she made use of those people. When she left, many people cheered behind her back. This fiend had finally left. During this period of time, the number of people fighting in the square had decreased by more than 2/3. As for the remaining 1/3, once they saw Xiaoqing coming over, half of them would immediately run away, even abandoning the slaves they had pawned. Xiaoqing walked out of the city gate with her little friends, found the direction to Mount Fuji, and chose a path. After walking for a few minutes, she helplessly turned around and looked at Moongazer Whitewater behind her. I already told you that there is still a month left in the apartment I rented. You can stay there. I also left food for you. Why did you follow me? The full moon Whitewater didn't say anything. It just looked at her with its big watery eyes, as if it wanted to say something. Xiaoqing said coldly, if you insist on following me, then so be it. If you encounter any danger, I won't save you. Mochizuki Baishui still did not speak. Then he really followed her for a whole day. When it was time to set up camp in the afternoon, Moongazer Whitewater was watching from a distance. It hugged its knees pitifully and sat in the grass. It took out a dry and hard biscuit from its small cloth bag and ate it. At night, he slept in the grass. Xiaoqing tossed and turned at night. She was angry at Mochizuki Baishui's stubbornness, and she was angry at herself for being too soft-hearted. She gritted her teeth and decided to ignore him. As a result, when she got up the next morning, Mochizuki Baishui was covered in dew. Unsurprisingly, he was sick. His face was red. He obviously had a fever. His vision was a little blurry, but he still stubbornly followed Xiaoqing. Not to mention Mikiko Ito. Even Feng Lan could not bear to see him like this. When Mochizuki Baishui could not hold on and fell down several times and got up again, Xiaoqing sighed and said to Mikiko Ito, go and carry him here. He was only 17 or 18 years old. For Xiaoqing, he was still a child. She really could not bear to see him die of exhaustion. But Xiaoqing could not see that when Mikiko Ito carried Mochizuki Baishui, the corners of his mouth curled up. From the very beginning, Mochizuki Baishui knew the ending would be like this, because he saw very clearly that Xiaoqing was actually a person who could be persuaded by reason, but not cowed by force. She looked very cold, but in fact she was very soft-hearted. So, she would definitely let him stay. On the other side, Yin Qiyue's eyes were dark. He also saw clearly that Mochizuki Baishui was very similar to him in many ways. A mountain could not accommodate 2 tigers, not to mention this one had bad intentions. Yin Qiyue did not object to anything, because he would never oppose Xiaoqing's decision, but he was secretly vigilant. Chapter 450. There was a saying, as long as the pickaxe was swung well, there was no corner that could not be dug down. No matter how confident he was in Xiaoqing, he still had to guard against those men with bad intentions, especially people like Mochizuki Baishui, whose skin was thicker than a city wall, and could be directly shameless at critical moments. They were exactly the same as him. He had to guard against them. Therefore, Mochizuki Baishui, who used the trick of injuring himself, successfully joined Xiaoqing's small team. When he woke up from his coma, he saw Xiaoqing sitting by his bed, reading a book. "You're awake." Xiaoqing closed the book and said in a very light tone, "You want to follow me? First, don't ask what you shouldn't ask, and don't do what you shouldn't do. Just be obedient. Second, when it's time for me to leave, I'll leave immediately. Let's part on good terms, and don't fall out with each other. Third, if you have something to say it. Don't keep it in your heart, and turn it into a conspiracy. You think I'm soft-hearted, but maybe you haven't seen my hard-hearted side." Mochizuki Baishui's high fever had just subsided, and his body was still soft like noodles. He climbed up from the bed and wanted to approach Xiaoqing, but was silently pushed back by Xiaoqing. "Master, I will never do anything bad to you." Mochizuki Baishui blinked his beautiful eyes and said, "Master, don't worry, I understand." Xiaoqing nodded with an unfathomable expression, then said, "Take care of your body. We still have to continue on our journey tomorrow. If you drag us down, I will still mercilessly throw you away." Mochizuki Baishui heard this, and quickly got into bed, indicating that he was very obedient, and would take good care of his body. Xiaoqing went out. She was still boiling soup. When she was ladling soup for Yen Chiyue and Air Dai, Xiaoqing ordered Muko Ito to ladle a bowl for Mochizuki Baishui. Under Yen Chiyue's resentful gaze, Muko Ito left with the soup. When Moongazer Whitewater received the soup, his eyes were full of smiles. Moongazer Whitewater said that he had a hard heart, but in his eyes, he was a soft mess. He had never seen such a soft-hearted and powerful woman. Because of Moongazer Whitewater, they had stayed for an extra day. Otherwise, with Moongazer Whitewater's body, he would never have been able to keep up with their speed. Because of that, Yen Chiyue was very unhappy. When Xiaoqing was reading, Yen Chiyue lay in bed and stared at Xiaoqing's back with melancholy and resentment. Staring at Xiaoqing, she turned around helplessly. "What? You've been staring at me the whole afternoon." Yen Chiyue was wrapped in the blanket and crawled over like a great green insect. Then, she hugged Xiaoqing's small waist and said, "Ah Qing, that moon-gazing Whitewater is not simple." "I know." Xiaoqing leaned back lazily, and just happened to lie in Yen Chiyue's arms. Then she said, "He has many little tricks up his sleeves. I can see them very clearly, but I don't know what his goal is. The road ahead is long and boring, so I don't mind playing with him." "You're bored with me?" Yen Chiyue was just massaging Xiaoqing's shoulders at first, but soon, his fingers started to mess around. His 2 fingers were very nimble, especially when he was unbuttoning. Xiaoqing hooked Yen Chiyue's chin and kissed his soft and warm lips. Then, she held his hand and coaxed him like she was coaxing a child. "Stop fooling around. You can't be greedy for a moment of pleasure and ruin your body." Yen Chiyue was already holding it in. He dragged Xiaoqing onto the bed and said, Ah Qing, I can't take it anymore. I miss you so much. Just this once is okay." Chapter 451. Then Air Dai came in. Without saying a word, he rushed over like a small cannonball and threw Yen Chiyue away. Then he hugged Xiaoqing and declared his sovereignty. Yen Chiyue, who was hanging by the bed, was speechless. Xiaoqing laughed uncontrollably. She leaned on Air Dai's shoulder and rubbed her stomach, that was hurting from laughing. Then she said, "When you recover, I promise to feed you until you're full." After resting for a day, Moongazer Whitewater was much better. At least, he could keep up with their footsteps. Xiaoqing led them away. Japan was not a big place, but it was not small either. If they walked, it would take at least a month to reach the vicinity of Mount Fuji. Fortunately, Air Dai's condition was very stable now. Xiaoqing was not in a hurry. She led them slowly. Most of the time they were camping. They would not enter the base if they could. They would only enter the base when they had to replenish some things. Xiaoqing had seen too many things along the way. In the beginning, she would be so angry that she wanted to kill all those people. Now she had calmed down a lot. There was only one idea that was slowly lingering in her heart brewing. It was just a thought. Because she knew that one person's strength could not change such a big country. Even if it could be changed, it would take many years of effort. She was not a saint who would spend decades of effort to change a country. There were many friends at home, and her son was waiting for her to go back. She would be crazy to stay here and shine for Japan. Uft. Actually, just thinking about the war that caused the people of China to suffer many years ago, Xiaoqing felt that this country purely deserved it. This should be retribution, right? Thinking about it, she suddenly felt that it did not matter anymore. However, when she saw it, she still felt annoyed. After all, even if this country had done wrong, not everyone was wrong. Xiaoqing felt that she shouldn't think so much because she didn't have the strength to do so. Thinking too much would be bad for herself. On the fourth day, they announced that they had run out of vegetables and fruits. They had to find a place to replenish their supplies. However, there was no base nearby. As the sky was gradually darkening, they could only find a place to set up camp temporarily and wait for tomorrow to find a base. Muko Ito was sitting at the entrance of the tent, drawing a map. She was an ordinary person, and she was very delicate. However, she was very powerful. Her memory was particularly good, and it could be said that she had a photographic memory. She was currently drawing a map of Japan. Mochizuki Baishui was sitting beside her. He couldn't hide the horror in his eyes. If he were to look for a paper map of Japan, he would find that Ito Jimiko's drawing was exactly the same. If we walk straight from here in 2 days, we will arrive at the wind. Since the outbreak of the apocalypse, the emperor has evacuated the original capital and built a new imperial palace. Master, do you want to take a detour? Muko Ito asked while drawing. Xiaoqing was holding a military knife and cutting wood. She was going to cut some wooden skewers to barbecue the meat later. Xiaoqing raised her head and asked curiously, "Why do we need to take a detour?" "There is no need to take a detour." She really wanted to see what the boss of Japan looked like. How could he leave his country in such a mess and not do anything about it? If he was ugly, she would just kill him. Muko Ito nodded and said, "There is a base closer to us. According to our speed, we should be able to reach by noon tomorrow." Okay. Xiaoqing handed the wooden skewers to Air Dai. Air Dai stacked the skewers to the side. After stacking the skewers, Yin Chiyue had already dragged the prey back. It was a goat with horns bigger than its head. The moon-gazing whitewater followed obediently. Together with Yin Chiyue, they dragged the prey to a nearby stream. They cut open its stomach and cleaned it up. After distancing himself from Xiaoqing, Yin Chiyue didn't give full moon of whitewater any face. He held a knife and cut open the goat's chest as he said, "I don't care what you're planning. Stay away from Qing, understand?" Moongazer Whitewater smiled innocently and said, "Why would I harm Master? I love her." Yin Chiyue was not jealous or angry. He just looked at Moongazer Whitewater and said, "You may think that she is soft-hearted and easy to fool, but you don't know that the most foolish person is you. Qing is indeed a soft-hearted person, but she is not a soft-hearted person. She can see through people's feelings, but she can see through people." Yin Chiyue wanted to see Moongazer Whitewater talk to Xiaoqing about his love. Xiaoqing would definitely kick him dozens of miles away, right? Moongazer Whitewater just smiled. He did not care about Yin Chiyue's words. He thought that he was very good at reading people. He had seen through Xiaoqing. He also saw through people in the world. To put it bluntly, she was just a woman with strength. She was very soft-hearted. Otherwise, she would not have brought him along. She was beautiful. Look at her sleeping in the same room with Air Dai and Yin Chiyue every day. She was also quite beautiful. That was all. Yin Chiyue did not correct Moongazer Whitewater's thoughts. No matter what he did, he would not succeed. In this regard, Yin Chiyue was very confident in Xiaoqing. He even wanted to see the expression on Moongazer Whitewater's face when he failed. It would be very interesting. Although Moongazer Whitewater did not love Xiaoqing, he had that kind of intention towards Xiaoqing. Even if he was a love rival, he had to be firm, accurate, and ruthless when dealing with a love rival. He would not give him a second chance to make a comeback. No matter what Moongazer Whitewater was hiding, it had nothing to do with them. Moongazer Whitewater, who did not know what Yin Chiyue was thinking, was full of confidence. He was even thinking about what to do next after subduing Xiaoqing. What he was going to do next required enough manpower and strength. Perhaps he could go to his uncle. With Xiaoqing's protection, even if his uncle fell out with him, he would be able to escape unscathed. However, this was after all a last resort. It would be best if they could reach an agreement. With his uncle's reputation and the manpower he had, it would be much easier for him to take back everything that belonged to him. While Moongazer Whitewater was thinking, he was kicked into the stream by the narrow-minded Yin Chiyue. What are you doing instead of working? Moongazer Whitewater. Chapter 452. After dinner and a good night's sleep, they went to the base. This time, they entered the base purely for supplies, so Xiaoqing decided to make a quick decision. She went straight to the market and left as soon as she could, because something else would happen if she delayed too long. This had become her life's rule, but she still couldn't avoid it and rushed into the market. Xiaoqing, who had just bought a bunch of vegetables and fruits, was about to leave, was hugged by someone. Yes, she was hugged. Her thighs. The poor girl was skinny and looked underage. Her clothes were torn and couldn't cover her body. 5 or 6 men of different heights rushed over and cursed. If I knew, I would have broken her legs. She can run so fast. No matter how fast she can run, we still caught her. I'll go first, and then cut off her thighs. She can run so fast, the meat on her thighs must be chewy. I'll slice it and dip it in vinegar. Let's catch her first. Don't let the duck in our hand fly away. The little girl was running around in the crowd. No one helped her. Some deliberately stretched out their legs to trip her. The rest of the people were watching the show. The girl accidentally tripped and fell far away. She rolled under Xiaoqing's feet and hit Xiaoqing's leg. She fell hard and couldn't get up for a long time. Her trembling body looked desperate. Xiaoqing didn't understand. It was just the end of the world. Why did it become like this? Before the end of the world, although there were many strange things in this country, it was really nothing like what she was seeing. What was wrapped under the human skin was not a human's heart, but a rotten and smelly beast that was worse than zombies. Zombies ate humans because they were irrational and driven by their instincts. What about these people? She knew that she couldn't control them. Even if she could control 1 or 2 people, she couldn't control this big country. She could only say that people in this country had a bad life. She hoped that they would be reincarnated in a good place in the next life. But when such a thing happened in front of her, she couldn't just ignore it. Even if she couldn't control the entire country, she had to at least be able to live up to her conscience. Yin Chiyue knew Xiaoqing's character better than anyone else. In fact, she was quite soft-hearted. Otherwise, she wouldn't have captured his heart with her silent gentleness when they first met. Therefore, Yin Chiyue took a step forward and was prepared to attack. Those people walked over triumphantly and reached out to grab the thighs of the girl on the ground. I told you to run. Why don't you run again? Let me see if you can run one more step. Then his hand was stepped on by Xiaoqing. What are you? He looked up, but before he could finish his words, Xiaoqing's foot hooked his chin. With a teeth-numbing crack, the man's head was directly turned back. If he could survive like this, Xiaoqing would let him go. In the next second, Yin Chiyue and Air Dai attacked at the same time. Air Dai had just rushed out with a ferocious face when he was caught by Xiaoqing and held in her arms. Then, she waved her hand and the vines drilled out. Then there was a particularly bloody scene. Arms, legs, heads, internal organs, and bright blood flowed all over the ground. Xiaoqing said coldly, I thought their blood was black, but it's actually red. Bad review. Yin Chiyue kicked a heart that was still connected to blood vessels out of the pool of blood. She smiled coldly. Why is this heart also red? Bad review. Chapter 453. The surrounding people were taken aback, but that was all. No one meddled in other people's business, and they dispersed as if it was a common occurrence. No one asked Xiaoqing why she killed people. Killing people because of a disagreement or displeasing to the eye was too common in this era. Xiaoqing patted the shoulder of the girl who was still lying on the ground, then pointed to the broken limbs on the ground and said, "You can search her body. Whatever you find is yours." The girl actually went to search her body. Xiaoqing didn't care anymore. She had cared enough. She left with the girls in her arms. Mochizuki Baishui, who was at the back, finally made a decision. Since they had left the base, they naturally had to sleep in the wilderness at night. Xiaoqing asked Yin Chiyue to find some insect-repellent plants and light them up. She smoked them in each tent to drive away the mosquitoes, so that they could sleep better. At night, she found a stream and washed her feet. When she was about to go back to sleep, she opened the tent and saw that it wasn't Dai and Yin Chiyue, but Mochizuki Baishui. He was almost naked because his loose kimono was hanging loosely on his body. At a glance, she could see that he was naked. Mochizuki Baishui was very good-looking. His delicate eyebrows were beautiful to the point of being charming, especially when he wanted to seduce someone. Xiaoqing's first reaction was to kick him out. Then, Xiaoqing discovered that Yin Chiyue was actually hiding behind the tent to watch the show. Xiaoqing raised her eyebrows. She was about to kick out, but she retracted her foot. She found a place to sit and crossed her legs. Mochizuki Baishui came over on his knees. He raised his head slightly. This angle made his delicate eyebrows look a little fragile. In particular, the unhealed scars that were exposed through his loose clothes made him look even more fragile. It also made people have a desire to rape him. However, Xiaoqing did not. She was already used to being seduced by Yin Chiyue. When Yin Chiyue was flirty, cough cough. When she was aroused, she was even more enchanting than the full moon white water. How could she fall for the full moon of white water when she was used to even more demonic things? She was just watching the show. She wanted to see what full moon in white water was going to do, and how far he could go. Moongazer Whitewater carefully reached out and helped Xiaoqing take off her shoes. As he did so, he said, "Is Master very tired? Do you need the Moongazer serpent to relieve you of your fatigue?" "Speak human language," Xiaoqing said lazily. She rested her chin on her hand and wondered how long Yin Chiyue could last. Then she was disgusted by the full moon Whitewater. Full moon of Whitewater stood up, unbuttoned his clothes, and looked at her with an affectionate and shy expression. He even spun around. Then he asked her, "Master, is the Moongazer beautiful?" Xiaoqing, who was prepared to watch the show, mercilessly kicked him out. "Beautiful my ass, stupid sissy." Her Yin Chiyue was also flirtatious. Cough cough, no, it was enchanting. But no matter how coquettish Yin Chiyue was, she would not be like the full moon of white water, possessed by a sissy. He was simply a transvestite. For the sake of her eyes, forget it. Moongazer Whitewater, who was lying at the door in a daze, was speechless. I guessed the beginning but not the end. Yin Chiyue leaned against the tent, laughing so hard that tears were about to come out. He quickly calmed himself down and made his expression look more serious. Then he walked out, not caring about the full moon of Whitewater's pitiful pride that had just been hurt. He said with a mocking expression, TSK, if you don't listen to your elders, you will suffer. Tell me, how should I treat someone who tries to seduce my woman?" Chapter 454. You say you're the royal family of Japan. And you're? You say you're the future emperor. And you're? You ask someone to help you take it back. And they help you? Do you think the whole world is your mother? Xiaoqing resisted the urge to roll her eyes and tried to make herself look friendlier. Are you done? If you're done, you can leave. Mochizuki Baishui heard this and felt wronged. Didn't he make things clear? Why was Xiaoqing chasing him away? He quickly said, I know Master is a good person, and I know Master doesn't want to see so many ordinary people suffer. I'm the same. If Master is willing to help me take back what belongs to me, I want to change the whole country. I've suffered before, and I don't want ordinary people to be treated like objects or livestock to be slaughtered. But with my current position, I'm destined to not be able to change anything. He looked at Xiaoqing with anticipation and said, Master, don't you want this country to change for the better? As long as the current emperor and prime minister are in power, nothing will change. Instead, it will get worse. Xiao Qing held a soft and warm body in her arms and said lazily, "What does it have to do with me? I'm not a Japanese, and I'll leave as soon as I'm done. So you're trying to suppress me with some righteous cause. I can't wait for Japan to sink." Mochizuki Baishui was dumbfounded. He thought that after these days of observation, he had figured out Xiao Qing's temper. Why didn't everything go according to the script? He was stunned for a while before saying, "If Master is willing to help me, I'm willing to ask Master to be my state teacher after I succeed. Of course, Master will always be my master." As he said this, he looked at Xiao Qing with an ambiguous and suggestive gaze. Did Xiao Qing, who was lying flat on the bed, really look like a lecherous ghost? She raised her finger and shook it. "First, I'm just an ordinary person. At most, I'm a pretty strong ability user. I can't help you with such a big thing. Second, I don't care about being a state teacher, and I don't want to be your master. Put down your things and leave quickly. If you don't leave, I can send you out." "Master, please reconsider." Moongazer Whitewater didn't pester her anymore. He put down the basin and went out. Yan Qiyu hugged Xiao Qing and asked curiously why. He was quite familiar with Xiao Qing. If she really had no interest at all, Xiao Qing would have flatly refused without explaining anything. "Actually, I also want someone to stand up and change this country. But like I said, what is the power of one person? Speaking of which, I'm just a slightly stronger paranormal. I can't help him at all. Of course, the most important thing is that I care more about you than these trivial things. Our key now is to go to Mount Fuji and find the medicine for air dye. People should know their limits. Don't meddle in things that you can't handle." Chapter 455. Because of this, Yan Qiyu was sure that Xiao Qing would not have any feelings for Mochizuki Baishui. To put it bluntly, it was like wearing two clothes of the same style. Whether it was the material details or other aspects, the one you were wearing was better than the one sold on the shelf. Would you take off the one you were wearing and wear the one that was worse? Normal people would not, right? Therefore, Mochizuki Baishui would never be able to hook up with Xiao Qing in this life. No way, not even a window. The next morning, Mochizuki Baishui was still calm, but he often pestered Xiao Qing. Sometimes he did it consciously, and sometimes he did it subconsciously. Then sticking and sticking they reached the wind boat. Before entering the beach, Mochizuki Baishui thought of many ways to hide his appearance. After all, there were still people who recognized him. As the largest survivor base in Japan, the beach was obviously more formal than other survivor bases. For example, the procedures to enter the city were more troublesome. Then, as usual, ordinary people would enter the observation room for a night. Xiao Qing and his family of 3 would enter the city normally. Mochizuki Baishui was very big, but it was only a little smaller than Kyoto. It was bigger than the survivor base in S City. Inside it looked more formal. At least, it wasn't like the other smaller survivor bases, which were full of abusers and violent scenes. But it was not much better. How tall could a tall man be if he was pulled out from a short man? The first thing to do after entering the base was to find a place to stay. Seeing that it was getting dark, Xiao Qing was too lazy to cook. So he said, "Why don't we find a restaurant to eat first, and then find a place to stay? We can also try some of the delicious food in Japan." Okay. Yan Qiyu and Air Dai agreed to whatever Xiao Qing said. Then they went to find a place to eat. After walking around, Xiao Qing found a high-end restaurant and walked in. There were many people sitting inside. Xiao Qing found a table and sat down. Immediately a waiter came over. "What would you like to eat?" Xiao Qing asked. "Do you have any famous dishes here?" The waiter hurriedly said, "We have everything you want to eat. This is the menu, you can take a look." After Xiao Qing took the menu, the temperature around her body dropped. The dishes at the front were relatively normal. There were sashimi, and so on. However, on the right, there was a row of extremely expensive dishes. Just looking at it made people angry. The name of the first row of dishes was shredded pork with green pepper. It looked very normal, but there was a row of small words below it. It said that it was made from the leg meat of young boys and girls under the age of 18. It was all natural and did not contain any spices. After that, there was something called the all-living feast. It was a feast where every part of a person was cooked using various methods and served on a table. Wait, Xiaoqing felt nauseous. She suddenly felt that even if Mochizuki Whitewater was selfish, at least he did have that kind of idea. He wanted to change the country. When people and animals appeared on the same menu, Xiaoqing's first feeling was not anger or shock, but deep despair. She did not know about other countries. After the apocalypse, she left China and came to Japan. This was the real apocalypse, the end of humanity, the end of humanity. If Mochizuki Whitewater could really do what he said, Xiaoqing was willing to help him. It was not for anything else, but for her conscience that had not been completely destroyed. Chapter 456. In the end, Xiaoqing resisted the urge to flip the table and left. As she walked out, she said self-deprecatingly, "This country is too dark and scary. If I stay here any longer, I'm afraid I'll go crazy from the suppression." Yin Chiyue could only comfort her. "We can leave Japan soon and go back to the Celestial Empire. If you feel depressed, before we leave air dye and I can accompany you to vent some." Don't think the wrong way. When he said venting, he meant to kill all the people that Xiaoqing didn't like and then leave. Xiaoqing didn't say her decision immediately. She wanted to observe Mochizuki Baishui and then teach him a lesson. Then, she would consider whether to help him or not. At least at this time, Xiaoqing really wanted to help Mochizuki Baishui. She only had Mochizuki Baishui by her side. He was qualified to be the savior of Japan. She had already calculated. At worst, she would go to Mount Fuji and solve Air Dye's problem. Before she left, she would find a way to kill the Emperor of Japan and the Prime Minister. Mochizuki Baishui would clean up the mess by himself. With the help of the crystal nucleus, Xiaoqing quickly rented a house. It was a 2-story bungalow. The window on the second floor was facing a small garden. The scenery was not bad. Of course, the rent of such a house was definitely high. Also, the landlord said that the rent would be at least 1 month. Xiaoqing rented a house for a month first. Anyway, she didn't lack crystal nuclei. After they settled down, Xiaoqing cooked for Air Dye and Yin Chiyue. She had no appetite. When she wanted to eat, she felt disgusted. For this reason, Yin Chiyue chatted with her for a long time. He wanted to cheer her up. In the end, Xiaoqing lay on the bed and said, "Let's stay here for 2 more days. We will observe the situation before we leave. These 2 days, we can go out and hunt some zombies to replenish our crystal nuclei." After all, they had spent a lot of crystal nuclei along the way, but their friends were good at leading the way, so they rarely encountered zombies. Logically speaking, Japan was a small country with a large population, so there should be a lot of zombies. However, their luck was off the charts. Along the way, they rarely encountered zombies. Occasionally, they would encounter a few scattered zombies, but they couldn't withstand a beating. Xiaoqing tidied up the bed and fell asleep with the 2 in her arms. Life also needed to be compared. Compared to those pitiful people, her life was simply too wonderful. She hugged left and right and didn't have to worry about food and drink. The next morning, Xiaoqing brought the 3 of them back and arranged a room for them. Then she said, "You will live here for the next 2 days. Try not to go out, because my baby and I are going out to hunt zombies. If you go out, no one can guarantee your safety. Do you understand?" The 3 of them nodded obediently. When they left, Xiaoqing deliberately mentioned Moongazer Whitewater. "I know you are a smart person, but in the face of absolute force, your brain is not enough. I know you will definitely go out. But when you go out, you have to remember that no matter how smart you are just an ordinary person. Don't cause trouble." Moongazer Whitewater's eyes were very enchanting. "Master, are you worried about me? Well, go to sleep." Xiaoqing completely ignored his secret eyes. She was ready to tidy up and go out with Yin Chiyue and Air Dye. It was better to go out early. After all, they didn't know where the zombies were. They had to go out first to find a place. Then they could kill zombies to fill her little treasury. Moongazer Whitewater, who was ignored, was speechless. After being beaten for a long time, Moongazer Whitewater was used to it. For example, teasing Xiaoqing with words and actions had become a habit for him. If he didn't tease her a few times every day, it wouldn't count as a day. Sometimes Xiaoqing thought that he was also a kind of masochist. Was he a masochist? No wonder Yin Qiyu said that Moongazer Whitewater was very similar to him. They were indeed very similar. Xiaoqing was also used to teasing Moongazer Whitewater. After teasing Moongazer Whitewater, she felt much better. After bullying Moongazer Whitewater, Xiaoqing packed up and told the three of them that she had already prepared food in the kitchen. They could eat after warming it up. She had prepared enough for 3 people. Even if she didn't come back in the afternoon, the 3 of them wouldn't starve. After everything was prepared, she went out with Yin Qiyu and Air Dai. Chapter 457. There were squads of paranormals in every base, even in Japan. After asking around, Xiaoqing learned that the squads of paranormals in the base would go around the base to clean up the zombies every once in a while. Therefore, it was very difficult to see zombies around the base. However, paranormals also needed nuclei to upgrade, so they would often form squads and go to farther places to get nuclei. In Japan, there were more squads of paranormals than fixed squads. In other words, anyone who lacked nuclei could go to the square to find his teammates and form a team freely. There were many people holding signs in the square, just like in a game where they formed a team to play a dungeon. Something like, go to XX place, where most of the zombies are level 3. Now there are 6 people in the team. 1 more person, and the team will be formed. Another 1, elite squad of paranormals. Looking for what paranormals above level 3. Main healer or support would be best. Another 1, team to fight level 5 zombie king. 2 more level 3 and above zombie hunting experience are needed. Distribution is fair. In short, it looked very strange. Xiaoqing didn't know this place, and didn't know where to go. The best way was naturally to find a good team. Xiaoqing arrived at the square and looked around. At least, she had to find a team that was pleasing to the eye. That way, the whole team wouldn't be wiped out by her before she arrived at the destination. Then, Xiaoqing saw a team of people from the same hometown. They were really too conspicuous. Japanese people were generally shorter. For example, Mochizuki Whitewater was already 20 years old. Although his face was a little tender, he looked like a minor. Of course, his height was also like a minor. He was a head shorter than Yin Qiyu, at least 20 centimeters. When these Chinese men stood in the square, they were simply cranes in a flock of chickens. Xiaoqing saw their heads from a distance. They were so conspicuous in the crowd. Then, Xiaoqing looked at their faces, heights, and temperaments. She recognized that they were all from the same hometown. His footsteps, which were originally heading in the other direction, immediately turned around. No matter what, it was more reliable to be from the same hometown. At least they looked friendly, so Xiaoqing walked over. The man in the lead was holding a sign in his hand. On it was written in Japanese, looking for wood ability users above level 3. Support is best. She was also a wood metahuman. Although she was not a support metahuman, her support abilities were definitely not inferior to a pure support level 3 wood metahuman. I'm a level 4 wood elemental arcanist. Do you want to join me? After Xiaoqing walked over, she opened her hand. Qiu Tang, who had not seen the light of day for a long time, came out from her palm. As soon as the faint fragrance drifted out, the few of them felt weak all over. Their heads felt heavy, and their feet felt light. Not to mention their abilities, they couldn't even use their strength. It wasn't until Xiaoqing took Qiu Tang that they slowly recovered, and looked at Xiaoqing in horror. The leader hurriedly said, "Welcome, welcome, but do you want to bring 2 slaves with you?" He said a little awkwardly, "It would be better if they brought 1 slave. But if they brought 2, they would only be a burden if they encountered danger." This was especially disadvantageous for them. Yin Qiyu immediately put her arm around Xiaoqing's shoulder and said with a smile, "Both of us are level 3 metahumans. We won't be a burden to you." Only then did the leader feel relieved. He couldn't help but give Xiaoqing a thumbs up. Being able to subdue 2 level 3 metahumans was also a skill. After joining the team, Xiaoqing found out that there were Japanese in this team. Half of them were Chinese, and the other half were Japanese. Chapter 458. Some of them were international students, while others came to Japan to work. After the outbreak of the apocalypse, they could not return home by sea, so they could only stay in Japan. It was difficult for them to survive in Japan. After all, few people could adapt to such a terrible country. However, they had no choice. In order to survive, they could only force themselves to adapt. After a long time, they learned not to be surprised. Some people even liked such a system. They were like those heartless beasts, buying and selling, torturing and killing slaves. They claimed to be fighting for the glory of the country and avenging those who died in the war. Xiaoqing just wanted to spit at them. Don't talk about fighting for the glory of the country. It was a dirty word. These people were still able to stick to the bottom line. They formed a small team and often went out to hunt zombies to feed themselves. However, the place they were going to this time was more dangerous. They had no choice but to recruit some teammates. They did not expect to recruit a fellow countryman. Especially after knowing that Xiaoqing came from the sea after the apocalypse, they were all excited. They all surrounded Xiaoqing and asked her about the situation in China. Xiaoqing had to tell them slowly and told them everything she knew. These people had not returned home for a long time. The sea was so dangerous. Some people had tried to leave by sea. No one knew whether they succeeded or not. Anyway, there was no news from them. Suddenly, someone came from their hometown. They were naturally very excited. They all thought of their hometown and their relatives. Some people even had tears in their eyes. The few Japanese on the side were somewhat dissatisfied and urged them to continue. The captain wiped his tears and said, "When we have a break at noon, you must tell us more about that place. It's been 8 years. I haven't been home for 8 years." Xiaoqing patted him on the shoulder, and the group left. There were more than 10 people in the group. In addition to Xiaoqing and the other 2 people, there was also the captain, Gao Xiang, and his 2 friends, Li Yangyang and Chengji, nicknamed Orange Juice. There were also 2 islanders, one with the surname Inoue, and the other with the surname Inoue. Xiaoqing could not remember their names. Each of them brought a slave. They were both female slaves. One was a young girl, and the other was more mature. Just like that, they went on their way. On the way, the youngest, Chengji, kept pestering Xiaoqing. He was a student studying abroad. When the apocalypse broke out, he was only 21 years old. He was young and had no backbone. If he had not met Gao Xiang, he would not have survived until now. Chengji kept describing his hometown to Xiaoqing. "My home is in the suburbs of a city. Although it's a rural area, the scenery is very good. I've had a dream since I was a child to buy a house in a city, and then let my parents and grandparents move in. When I left, my grandparents were already old and could not send me off at the airport. They walked me from the house to the door, from the door to the village entrance, and then they kept looking at me." Chengji's eyes turned red as he spoke. He was very clear that the apocalypse was the real doomsday for the elderly. His grandparents were already so old, and it was difficult for them to survive in the apocalypse. The more he knew, the more pain he felt. Xiaoqing did not want to hurt his feelings, so he did not say a word. What was she going to say? Did they say that the entire A city had fallen shortly after the outbreak of the apocalypse, and was now a dead city occupied by zombies? Chapter 459. The only thing she could do was to pat Chengji on the shoulder and comfort him. That was all. "I've made a fool of myself." Chengji wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes and said, "I only have one dream now, and that is to return to my country, to my hometown. No matter what, I have to go back and take a look. Even if I can't find my family anymore, I'm still young. I'll look for them for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and travel throughout the entire Celestial Empire. As long as they're still alive, I'll definitely be able to find them." "You will." Xiaoqing studied a lot of comforting words and finally said dryly, "Perhaps when she went back, she could take away these people who yearned for and wanted to return to their country. if she could get a big ship out. Chengji was still a lively young man. He kept asking Xiaoqing how she came to Japan. Xiaoqing briefly told him about the journey, including the volcanic eruption at the bottom of the sea, how they floated to the island, and how they made a ship to float to Japan. Then Chengji's reaction was, wow. So amazing. Then, his eyes lit up as he looked at Xiaoqing, filled with admiration. Yan Qiyue immediately felt that something was wrong, and was very vigilant. The emotion of admiration could easily turn into liking, and finally into love. This person had to be guarded against. Then the scene was like this. Chengji surrounded Xiaoqing, and there were two people on the left and right staring at Chengji covetously. The other two also wanted to know the situation in the country, and pricked up their ears to listen. At the end of the line, there were two Japanese who were flirting with women. The two brothers, Inoue and Inoue, were really weirdos among weirdos, because they stopped twice before lunch break. Every time, they carried the slaves behind the tree. As for what they did, Xiaoqing expressed that pure people did not know. Each time, it was only 3 minutes, and the time to take off their pants and put on their pants was also included. Could it be that they were peeing? Xiaoqing thought innocently. In short, they were two weirdos with estrus every 3 steps and kidney deficiency every 5 steps. When it was time for lunch break, Xiaoqing was going to find some wild animals nearby and bring them back for lunch. Who knew that Inoue would push his slave out and say, "Don't bother. I'll eat her for lunch today. I'm tired of playing with her anyway." Wakabayashi said mockingly, "This slave of yours is too old. His meat definitely won't taste good. It's better to keep him." Then, he pushed out the girl in his arms. "Eat her. Her meat is tender. Keep that one and lend it to me when the time comes." Xiaoqing had seen too many injustices along the way, but she couldn't do anything most of the time. Now that she saw these two weirdos, she couldn't help but pull out her military knife. Inoue thought that Xiaoqing was here to kill the slave, so he said, "Don't destroy the integrity of her skin when you kill her. I want to peel it off and make a blanket on the sofa." The little slave on the ground curled up into a ball and kept trembling. She looked very pitiful. Xiaoqing didn't say anything else. She held the military knife and nailed Inoue to the tree behind him. "Oh my God, your skin is too thick. It's not easy to make a blanket, but it can be used to make a carpet. I can help you." She pulled out another dagger and held it without blinking. She slashed it across Jing Shang's forehead from head to crotch. She cut it very appropriately. The skin and flesh on the wound turned out, but it wasn't fatal. Xiaoqing fiddled with the dagger and said in disdain, "I thought it was a human. Only after peeling off the skin did I realize that it was an animal. It doesn't even have the right to make a carpet." Inoue was already scared out of his wits. He didn't expect Xiaoqing to suddenly make a move and nail Inoue to the tree. The military knife pierced through his shoulder blade. It would hurt him a lot, but he wouldn't die. Inoue cursed. Then he retreated and said, "You're crazy. You're crazy. Crazy woman." Xiaoqing was expressionless. The vines had already drilled out. Inoue wanted to struggle a little. No matter what, he was a level 3 mutant. However, a level 3 mutant was just a small shrimp to Xiaoqing. She could crush him to death with 2 fingers. In less than a few seconds, Inoue was also dragged over and hung on the tree by the vines. Xiaoqing actually wanted to torture the two of them alive. But in this way, what was the difference between her and these people? Too much abuse and violence would actually have a huge impact on her, especially on her way of dealing with things. She didn't want to become a violent person. Therefore, she decisively gave the two of them a quick death. When she turned around, she saw Chengji and the others. Chapter 460. It seemed that something was exposed. Xiaoqing silently lowered her head and looked at the 2 corpses. Dummy and Yan Qiyue had already cooperated with her to bury them. The service of torturing, killing, and burying them couldn't be better. Xiaoqing tried her best to make herself look kinder, and then said, "I can't accept eating people. The 2 of them are stubborn, and they force me to give up on persuading them to use force. It's just that I'm usually quite gentle. Only a fool would believe her." However, Gao Xiang, and the other two did not like the two Japanese to begin with. It was just that after getting used to some things, they chose not to see or participate in some aspects. So when Xiaoqing killed people, the three of them secretly applauded and praised her. But they didn't expect Xiaoqing to be so shameless. He was lying through his teeth, and he even said it with a straight face. In the end, their lunch was wild vegetable soup with the preserved meat that Xiaoqing saved and biscuits. They didn't want to go hunting anymore. The two women were trembling with fear, fearing that they would be eaten, but they were very grateful to Xiaoqing. So they quickly helped her pack up. At first, they didn't dare to eat at the table. They only dared to watch from the side, looking very pitiful. Xiaoqing called them. Seeing that they still didn't dare to come over, she set up a small table for them. She scooped some soup and vegetables and asked them to eat at the side. With the two girls, they did all the logistics, such as washing the dishes and cleaning up the kitchen utensils. At night they set up camp outside. When Xiaoqing took out the tent and looked for things in the space, the two girls quickly set up the tent. They were so fast that Xiaoqing was a little dumbfounded. She just finished looking for things. When she looked up, the tent was already in front of her. At night, the two girls were very obedient. They did this and that and tidied up everything very well. Maybe they were afraid of being thrown away, so it was useful to show off. The next morning, they arrived at their destination. It was a small town that had fallen into the hands of the zombies. This town used to be a bustling town with a lot of people living there. That was why the number of zombies had increased after the apocalypse. It was said that someone had seen a zombie king here. Xiaoqing just wanted to get some high-level zombie nuclei to supply air dye. So she hoped to meet a zombie king. Xiaoqing regretted it when she entered the town. She had seen scattered zombies before, but she hadn't seen many of them, so she didn't have this kind of feeling. But now, she came to a place with a lot of zombies. As soon as she saw a row of zombies, she began to feel sick. He didn't know if it was because of the radiation, but the zombies in Japan were very ugly. They were much uglier than the zombies in China. Many zombies had large bubbles on their bodies. They were transparent bubbles filled with water, as if they would burst with a poke. They could kill people with trypophobia. Moreover, the zombies here had a high degree of decay. On the surface of their skin, there were bubbles, pustules, and so on. They looked very disgusting, many times more disgusting than the zombies in China. Was this the legendary disgusting person's disgusting part? Had the zombies in this country become more disgusting than the zombies in other places? Anyway, Xiaoqing was already disgusted, and very disgusted. If she didn't come here, and couldn't go back empty-handed, she would have turned around and left. Then let's start. Don't be separated. Stay close to each other. If anything happens, we can take care of each other. Gao Xiang mainly reminded Xiaoqing, who was a newcomer. After all, this town was relatively dangerous. Gao Xiang had a good impression of Xiaoqing. He didn't want anything to happen to Xiaoqing. Chapter 461. Xiaoqing nodded, and they officially stepped into the town. The zombies in Japan were not only uglier than those in China, but also more ferocious. As soon as they entered the town, they were immediately besieged. The zombies that smelled the scent of humans immediately rushed over, and they even rushed over in groups. Gao Xiang and the others had been in this team for a long time, so their tacit understanding was naturally very high. They reacted instantly, activated their abilities, and stood back to avoid being surrounded by zombies. Xiaoqing and the others stood beside Gao Xiang and the others. As soon as the zombies rushed over, Xiaoqing quickly took out the guangguang that she had just received. The guangguang grew out from between them, and the tree crown was lush. The branches slowly drooped down, forming the appearance of an umbrella, protecting everyone in the middle. Those who were covered by the tree crown immediately felt refreshed, and they had endless strength. At the same time, countless vines drilled out and began to strangle the surrounding zombies. Air Dai was injured, so he could only be a logistics personnel, and was responsible for collecting nuclei. As soon as a zombie was killed, he quickly went forward and dug out the nuclei. He was very active on the battlefield. Gao Xiang and the others were a little dumbfounded. They had already made preparations. Seeing that the zombies were about to pounce on them, they were also ready to make a move. Then, Xiaoqing and Yin Chiyue showed them a perfect cooperation. One was responsible for trapping the zombies, and the other was responsible for killing them. They were so fast that they were dazzled. Not a single zombie was able to get close to the Guangguang's protective circle. They came out to kill zombies, not to be bystanders. However, they didn't need to do anything at all. Xiaoqing and Yin Chiyue had already killed the zombies. They didn't even need to clean the battlefield, because air dye was like the wind. So, they were actually just leading the way, right? However, the three people who were responsible for leading the way hesitated for a while. The first wave of zombies had already been completely wiped out, and air dye came back with a pile of nuclei. Xiaoqing counted and gave half of it to Gao Xiang and the others. Gao Xiang waved his hand and said, "You guys worked hard to get it. You don't have to share it with us." Xiaoqing was also very honest. Before we set off, we made it very clear that the loot this time, no matter how many there are, will all be distributed according to the number of people. Could it be that when you get the crystal cores in the future, you don't intend to share them with us? No. Gao Xiang was preparing to explain, but Xiaoqing had already stuffed the crystal core over. That's right. Let's continue to move forward. Therefore, for the next 3 hours, Gao Xiang and the others felt like they had just hit the biggest bottle of soy sauce in the world. Throughout the whole process, other than following Xiaoqing's footsteps, they did nothing else. To be precise, they couldn't do anything, because as soon as they encountered zombies, Xiaoqing and Yin Chiyue would take the initiative to attack first. They didn't even have a chance to attack before the zombies were cleared. Almost the whole time, they didn't do anything. Even when they encountered a few level 4 zombies, they didn't have a chance to attack. The situation at that time was like this. When the zombies jumped out, Li Yangyang exclaimed, "Level 4 zombies! Everyone be careful." Before he could shout, the overwhelming vines had already flown out and trapped the zombies easily. As soon as Yin Chiyue raised her hand, several level 4 zombies were turned into meat patties. Air Dai leisurely stepped forward and dug out the nuclei. Li Yangyang equals mouth equals he suddenly didn't believe what Xiaoqing had told him. She was only at level 4. How was that possible? A level 4 superpowered person could kill level 4 zombies within seconds? And more than one. Chapter 462. Xiaoqing was at least a level 5 zombie. At least. The three of them were worried at first, but in the end, they could only stay confused from the beginning to the end. They couldn't do anything at all. Therefore, when they returned to the outside of the town, Xiaoqing wanted to share the nuclei with them. They refused. They didn't do anything, but they still wanted to share half of the nuclei. Were they even human? Xiaoqing thought that since they had agreed, they had to do it. Gao Xiang and the others felt that they didn't do anything, so they refused to take anything. In the end, both sides took a step back, and Gao Xiang and the others took a small part, which was probably equivalent to the guide fee. In Xiaoqing's words, "Without you leading the way, we couldn't find the place, let alone hunting zombies, so you must take some." Gao Xiang and the others immediately had a feeling that they had officially changed from a team of paranormals to tour guides. They got the nuclei, so they should go back. The harvest this time was not much for Gao Xiang and the others, but it was not little either. After all, they didn't take any risks, but they got a lot of nuclei, which was already a big profit. These crystal nuclei were enough for them to use for a long time. Gao Xiang and the others felt very grateful for this, so Xiaoqing conveniently stuffed the two girls to them, saying, "My two are jealous easily. Don't talk about girls. As long as it's someone close to me, they won't be willing. So, you guys take these two people back, and think about how to settle them." She happily threw this burden to Gao Xiang and the others. Then they went back. Don't forget, before she left, she made enough food for 2 meals. It was already the second day, so Xiaoqing was still a little worried. The speed of going back was faster than when they came. Xiaoqing took her friends and ran all the way. After arriving at the survival base, they temporarily separated from Gao Xiang and the others. As soon as Xiaoqing went back, she found that she thought too much. The two dogs at home lived quite well. After all, she left a lot of vegetables and fruits, as well as nuclei. Regardless of whether he cooked it himself or went out to buy it, it was enough. She can't starve the two at home. After getting the crystal nucleus and buying a lot of things, Xiaoqing prepares to take people to Mount Fuji. Air Dai's injury was like a ticking time bomb. No one knew when it would explode, so it was better to deal with it first. Other things could wait until Air Dai's injury was healed. Moreover, after going to Mount Fuji and finding the things, it would take some time to figure out how to treat it. It would take a long time for Air Dai's injury to be completely healed. This period of time was enough for Xiaoqing to do many things. Xiaoqing saw a lot when she was at the survivor base. Japan was already in such a mess. What about other places? It would definitely be messier. Xiaoqing didn't feel that she was the savior of the world. She was just one person, and she had the necessary ability. She really should do something if it was within her ability. After all, the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. This responsibility wasn't forced. It was completely voluntary. If you don't want to do it, no one will force you. You just need to ask your conscience. Before leaving, Xiaoqing talked with Mochizuki Baishui alone. This time, Mochizuki Baishui didn't make any mess. He talked a lot with Xiaoqing very seriously. Xiaoqing only expressed two ideas from the beginning to the end. First, she also felt that Japan was too chaotic, and indeed needed to change the ruler. However, she was just an ordinary paranormal, so she couldn't help Mochizuki Baishui much. Chapter 463. Secondly, she always had something urgent to do, so she hoped that Moongazer Whitewater would not rely on her too much. Full Moon of White told Xiaoqing a lot of things in a serious manner. He told her about his plan, his backup plan, and what he would do to change the country if he succeeded. It had to be said that his description had moved Xiaoqing. If he could really do what he said, then she would be willing to help him. In the past, Xiaoqing did not believe in things like merit and retribution. After all, she had killed a lot of people. No matter whether they were bad or not, they were still human lives, so it should be harmful to merit. But after having children and Air Dai, Xiaoqing began to believe in things that she did not believe in before. She considered it as accumulating some karma for her family and friends. When they left, Moongazer Whitewater did not leave. Xiaoqing had rented the house for a month, so she let him live there. Then she took her friends to Mount Fuji. When they went back, Moongazer Whitewater should have contacted his people. After passing through the survivor base, they were not far from Mount Fuji. When they arrived at the foot of Mount Fuji, it was the season of cherry blossoms. There were cherry blossoms everywhere, which looked very beautiful and romantic. Because she was worried about Air Dai, Xiaoqing did not have the mood to see the cherry blossoms. She took her friends and ran all the way to the top of the mountain. Mount Fuji was an active volcano, but it had not erupted for many years. In addition to volcanic ash, there was dried magma on the top of the mountain. At the top of the mountain was a magma pool, but there were only dry stones left in the magma pool. Xiaoqing looked around, but did not see any green plants. She was a little anxious. Where is the thing that Air Dai needs? Yan Qiyu also frowned. Normally, there should be some special plants at the mouth of a volcano. Even if the plants have mutated after doomsday, it is impossible for all of them to grow legs and run away. He lifted his foot and kicked a stone aside. Then, he directly jumped into the dried magma pool. The last eruption of Mount Fuji was many years ago. The magma here had already dried up for 8 generations. Yan Qiyu looked around, but didn't see anything green. She couldn't help but feel a little discouraged. Could it be that you can only find it in the crater of a volcano that has just erupted? This request was very difficult. Volcanoes that had just erupted were very rare. Even if they saw one, they didn't dare to go up and look for it. At that time, the magma was still active. Perhaps, the volcano would erupt for the second time when they went over to take a look. At that time, they would lose their lives. Xiaoqing was even more desperate. It could be said that they had spent a lot of effort to find such an active volcano, but it was useless. They didn't even see a bit of green. Could it be that he really had to find a way to go somewhere else and look for an active volcano that had just erupted? It doesn't have to be a volcano that has just erupted. As long as it is not a volcano that has been dormant for many years, it will be fine. Yin Qiyu was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he didn't want to talk about this with Xiaoqing. He had seen Xiaoqing's efforts. They had found the place, but they didn't find what they needed. He was really unwilling to leave like this. However, there was no other way. Air Dai was still waiting for them to find the plants they needed to solve the strange force in the wound. Yin Qiyu lifted his foot and was ready to leave. However, he stepped on a stone. The stone rolled down and coincidentally smashed a piece of volcanic ash that had almost evolved into a fossil. A touch of light green was exposed. Yin Qiyu put his foot down. He quickly pulled out a dagger and picked up a thick piece of volcanic ash. The green, moss-like plant underneath was exposed. Yin Qiyu's eyes lit up at once. There were plants here. After he told Xiaoqing about this discovery, the group of people squatted down and started knocking on the shell made of volcanic ash. They knocked all the way to the center of the magma pool. Xiaoqing realized that the sound was wrong. It was as if there was a vacuum under the layer of volcanic ash. She asked Yin Qiyu and the others to step back. Then, she used the military knife in her hand to test the waters. After breaking through a layer of volcanic ash, she didn't feel any resistance. There was really a vacuum underneath. She was delighted. Then she used force to pry open an opening. As soon as she pried it open, Xiaoqing was stunned. Through the opening, she realized that there was a volcanic crater under the magma pool. This place should be the center of the volcanic eruption. Later, the thick volcanic ash and magma mixed together and blocked the exit. No one would run to the volcanic crater like them, so no one discovered it. Under the volcanic ash that was 30 to 40 centimeters thick, there was really a volcanic crater. There was even a touch of red. It was probably flowing magma. In this way, they were simply courting death by standing on this fragile volcanic ash layer. Maybe when the volcanic ash under their feet collapsed, they would fall into it. Xiaoqing quickly asked them to step back until they reached the edge of the magma pool. Then, she tied a vine around Yin Qiyu's body and tied the other end around her waist. If she fell in, she wouldn't fall directly into the magma. Then, Xiaoqing kept widening the original small opening. She carefully opened a big opening little by little. Looking at the magma below, Xiaoqing felt a little lucky. They really came at the right time. If they came a few days later, they might have arrived at the time of the eruption of Mount Fuji. Then they would have come in vain. Fortunately, Mount Fuji was in a state where it was about to erupt, but it hadn't erupted yet. It maintained a strange state of balance. After Xiaoqing opened a hole big enough for one person to go through, she stuck her head in and shone with a flashlight. The stone walls on both sides were covered with moss-like plants. Chapter 464. Logically speaking, the deeper they went, the closer they were to the magma, and the higher the temperature. There shouldn't be any plants. However, Xiaoqing used the light to scan, and found that the deeper they went, the more plants there were. At first, it was just a layer of moss, but as they went down, it became taller weeds, and as they went further down, they could only see sporadic flowers. It was too magical. Could it be that after the apocalypse, the plants had mutated and become more adaptable? Did they start to like the high temperature? Xiaoqing didn't know, but she was sure of one thing, and that was they had to go down. Yes, they had to go down. If they didn't find any plants outside, then their last hope was inside. According to the law, the deeper they went, the more plants there were. Maybe what they were looking for was near the magma, but it was too dangerous. Below was magma, and the temperature was enough to melt people in an instant. In other words, if they accidentally fell into the magma, they wouldn't have any chance of survival. Then, who should go down? Yin Qiyu stood up silently and gently hugged Xiaoqing, and then said, "I'll go down. We don't know what kind of plants can cure air dye, but I'm an expert in this field. I can slowly find them after I go down." No. Xiaoqing refused without hesitation. She frowned and then said, "It's too dangerous." Aching. Yin Qiuyue grabbed Xiaoqing's shoulder and kissed her, and then said, "Are you going to say that it's too dangerous, so you go down? Every time, you leave all of us and face the danger alone. Have you ever thought about us? I'm a man. If I let my woman take risks every time, then am I still a man? Qing, don't take everything on your shoulders. Now that we are together, you can try to trust me more and share some of the burden with me." Yin Qiuyue had always listened to Xiaoqing, but this time, he didn't want Xiaoqing to take risks. She had taken enough risks, and he had to bear it for once. Xiaoqing hesitated for a second and then said, "Let's go together." If she let Yin Qiuyue go down alone, she would definitely be worried. Since Yin Qiuyue refused to let her go down alone, she would compromise and let the two of them go down together. This result was already very good for Yin Qiuyue. Then, they began to discuss how to proceed. The best way was naturally Xiaoqing's vines. Xiaoqing looked around and found nothing suitable to make a pillar. She had to tie the end of the vine to her bare body and let Air Dai and Muko Ito guard it. The other end was tied to her and Yin Qiuyue's waist. The two of them went down one after the other. Xiaoqing was below. This was Xiaoqing's request. She said very clearly that if Yin Qiuyue insisted on going down, then she would go down alone. Yin Qiuyue had no choice but to listen to her. Xiaoqing stretched out her sharp nails and grabbed the wall. Then she slowly climbed down. The space below was still very wide. She had a pink lantern on her waist. In the range of the lantern's light, she could see the dense moss on the wall. Yin Qiuyue didn't have any nails to use, so she had to use a dagger to stab into the wall to stabilize her body. The two of them slowly climbed down. They didn't know how long they had been climbing, but they were still far from the magma. However, they could already feel the scorching temperature. At this time, there were many kinds of plants growing on the walls. Yin Qiuyue directed Xiaoqing to pick a lot of plants and put them into the space. They would distinguish them one by one when they went out. Chapter 465. Xiaoqing didn't feel tired, but Yin Qiuyue was. They had been climbing for so long that Yin Qiuyue was already exhausted. Xiaoqing stopped and supported Yin Qiuyue to let him rest for a while. When he had rested enough, they continued to climb. Time passed minute by minute. When they could see the surface of the magma lake, Yin Qiuyue exclaimed, "Look!" Xiaoqing lowered her head and immediately saw a flower growing on the edge of the magma lake. The flower was very beautiful. Its red petals overlapped, and the color of the petals changed from light to dark, like a blooming flame. It was so beautiful, especially when it was reflected by the dark red magma. Xiaoqing could even imagine that when the volcano erupted, the color of the magma would become bright. When the whole flower was submerged in the magma, it would definitely be even more beautiful. However, what they needed to do now was to pluck the flower. This peanut field was so close to the magma. It might be what Xiaoqing and Yin Qiuyue were looking for. The two immediately sped up and climbed down. The closer they got to the magma, the more careful they were. Occasionally, one or two stones would be stepped into the magma and be swallowed by the magma in an instant. Finally, Xiaoqing was the first to reach a place very close to the magma lake. Xiaoqing couldn't feel the scorching temperature. At most, she felt that her skin was a little drier than usual. However, Yin Qiuyue was already sweating all over. Xiaoqing's nails were stuck in the wall, and her other hand reached out to grab the flower. The flower's root was in the magma, so it looked like the whole flower was floating on the magma. In fact, a section of its stem was above the magma lake. As long as Xiaoqing pinched the stem, she could pull the whole flower out. As soon as she pinched the stem, she saw a bubble on the surface of the magma lake. Then a red snake came out of the magma. Xiaoqing was caught off guard. Although she had always been vigilant, she had never thought that there would be living things in such high-temperature magma. Therefore, when the snake came out, it gave her a fright. Her hand trembled, and the whole flower was pulled out by her. She hurriedly stuffed the flower into her space, and then her whole body stuck to the wall. The snake that drilled out was very long and thick. It stirred the magma, and bits of magma splashed on the wall. The moment it saw that the flower was gone, the entire snake became irritable and directly pounced on Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing was in such a place with Yin Qiyu above her head. She couldn't move at all and couldn't dodge at all. She could only pull out the military knife from her waist and face the snake head-on. The snake's head hit the military knife. The huge force made her hand go numb. The military knife fell and was swallowed by the magma. Xiaoqing didn't have time to mourn the knife that she had used for a long time. She was in a state of what the fuck, because she saw that the magma had become irritable and was continuously spreading upwards. God, was the volcano going to erupt? If the volcano erupted at this time, she and Yin Qiyu would definitely die here. The power of nature was irresistible. For example, when the volcano erupted at the bottom of the sea, they almost died in the sea. Xiaoqing's heart was filled with what the fuck. She carried Yin Qiyu and climbed up the wall like a nimble monkey. There was also an enraged fire snake below. It hissed and spat out its tongue, trying to attack Xiaoqing. However, it seemed like it couldn't leave the magma. After half of its body was outside the magma, it couldn't drill out anymore. It could only spit out its tongue angrily, and then slowly be swallowed by the magma. If someone could drill into the magma at this moment, they would discover that the snake's tail was in the rock. During the apocalypse, there was a small volcanic eruption that didn't even erupt out of the ground. It was at that time that the snake accidentally fell in. Chapter 466. Fortunately, after the apocalypse, animals began to mutate. It did not die in the magma, and half of its body grew together with the solidified magma. When Xiaoqing carried Yin Qiyu and climbed up, Dumbo outside was also being tested. He was originally squatting on the ground and counting stones. Suddenly, the ground shook, and then countless snakes, insects, rats, and ants suddenly ran out of their nests, as if they were running for their lives and ran down the mountain quickly. Some beasts were also like that. Erdai was stunned, but Ito Jimiko reacted. Not good. The volcano is going to erupt. She was speaking Japanese, so Erdai did not understand it. Even if he did, he would not leave Xiaoqing alone. At this time, a mutant tiger jumped out from the side. It seemed to be one of the members who were preparing to escape because of the eruption, but it happened to bump into Erdai. A tender girl like Ito Kurumiko was a great temptation to mutated beasts. It was tempting to come up and take a bite of her. Ito Jimiko was left behind by Xiaoqing, so Erdai would not let Ito Jimiko be eaten. He stopped the tiger and threw Ito Jimiko under the light. With Kwang Guang protecting Ito Jimiko, she was relatively safe. Erdai was injured. Normally, he could easily beat a level 3 or 4 mutant tiger. However, he was injured, so he could not beat this mutant tiger. Erdai was not stupid. If he could not beat the tiger, he would hide under the light. This tiger would not dare to enter the range of Kwang Guang. Otherwise, with Kwang Guang's help, he could beat this tiger in minutes. Then an accident happened. The tiger pounced forward and broke the vines. Dummy's face changed immediately. He didn't care about the tiger anymore. He quickly pounced forward and grabbed the broken vines. The tiger did not eat zombies. It was only interested in Ito Jimiko. Now that it could not eat Ito Jimiko, and felt that the volcano was about to erupt, it ran away. As for Xiaoqing and Yin Qiyu, Xiaoqing had given up climbing up step by step, because it was too slow. She grabbed the wall and ran all the way. While running, the vine suddenly loosened, and she and Yin Qiyu fell down. Xiaoqing was caught off guard, and almost fell into the magma. Just as she was about to come into contact with the magma, and some splashes of magma had even landed on her body, she stopped. Xiaoqing immediately knew that something must have happened outside. She grabbed the wall, and could not help but have a headache. Her previous efforts were in vain. She had to climb up again. Xiaoqing did not know that Erdai was at the entrance of the cave at the moment. He grabbed the vine tightly. His clothes were torn because of the fast dragging. He grabbed the vine tightly, and hooked his foot on a stone outside the cave. Then he slowly climbed back. During the climb, he had to hold on to the vine tightly. Fortunately, Xiaoqing was attached to the wall at this moment, so she would not bring any burden to Dummy. He grabbed the vines and slowly retreated. After Xiaoqing felt the force pulling her waist, She followed him and climbed up. One was pushing, and the other was climbing. Below them was the magma. It was very dangerous. Air Dai grabbed the vine and returned to the Quang Guang tree. He tied the vine to the trunk and then pulled the vine to help Xiaoqing. Ito Jimiko also rushed to help. With this help, Xiaoqing climbed up a lot faster. Finally, before the magma gushed out, she climbed out of the cave. Chapter 467. After a night of rest, they decisively returned to Kamikaze to give Yin Chiyue a quiet space to study the medicine. Xiaoqing still had the key in her hand. After returning to her rented room, she directly opened the door. Moongazer Whitewater was not there, but it was obvious that someone took care of the house every day. Yin Chiyue carried a pile of plants and quickly went upstairs to study, leaving Xiaoqing and Air Dai sitting there in a daze. After a while, Feng Lan was the first to come back with a bag of groceries. Back then, the journey to Mount Fuji was not safe, and Feng Lan did not have the ability to protect himself, so Xiaoqing left him at the survivor base. "You're back." Feng Lan was very excited and threw the bag of vegetables. Xiaoqing nodded and said, "You bought a lot of vegetables. Why did you buy so much? You can't save it." Feng Lan quickly said, "Moongazer Whitewater said that he wanted to bring his uncle back for dinner, so I bought more vegetables. I bought them together with tomorrow's food, so we don't have to go out." Moongazer Whitewater's uncle? Xiaoqing did not think too much. She just accompanied Feng Lan to the kitchen to prepare the vegetables. When the dishes were almost done, Moongazer Whitewater finally came back. He also brought back an acquaintance of Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing heard the sound and poked her head out of the kitchen. She saw Abe Shizuki behind Moongazer Whitewater. She was stunned for a moment, then couldn't help but say, "Moongazer Whitewater, this is your uncle?" Moongazer Whitewater was also surprised. He looked up at Xiaoqing a little shyly. "Master, you're back?" "Yes, this is my uncle." Abe Shizuki obviously did not expect that he would meet Xiaoqing again, and in Japan. "I think this is probably fate," Abe Shizuki said self-deprecatingly. Xiaoqing shrugged and said, "It's probably an ill-fated relationship." This time, Moongazer Whitewater was curious. "They know each other?" He was stunned for a moment, then asked. "Of course we know each other." Xiaoqing made an inviting gesture and said, "No matter what, please come in first. Otherwise, people will say that we are neglecting our guests." Then they entered the house. After entering the house, Ito and Mikiko immediately came forward to serve tea. Their hands were very fast. Each of them held a teacup, and the three of them sat on the sofa and chatted. "I didn't expect you to be Moongazer Whitewater's uncle." Xiaoqing sighed. The full moon of white water immediately knelt in front of her and hugged Xiaoqing's leg shyly. "I didn't know that master and my uncle knew each other." Then he was kicked out by Xiaoqing. "Speak normally." After chatting for a while, Xiaoqing learned that Abe Shizuku was the brother of Mochizuki Shirasui's mother. Mochizuki Shirasui's mother was also from the Abe family, but she wasn't on Myoji. The relationship between the brother and sister wasn't very good. Otherwise, when Mochizuki Shirasui was in trouble, Abe Shizuku wouldn't have stopped. It wasn't bad. Otherwise, Mochizuki Shirasui wouldn't have been able to invite Abe Shizuku. While chatting, it could be seen that Abe Shizuku was a little wary of Xiaoqing. The reason why he agreed to help Mochizuki Shirasui was because of his sister's friendship, and also because he couldn't bear to see Japan becoming more and more chaotic. Japan needed a leader who was bold and willing to reform. Mochizuki Shirasui might have a lot of things to change, but he was already much better than the current Showa. People were afraid of comparison. Xiaoqing and Abe Shizuku chatted, and found that Abe Shizuku had a lot of subordinates. He was in charge of the entire countries on Myoji, and a team of mutants. Chapter 468. In this team, there were at least dozens of level 3 paranormals, and a few level 4 paranormals. It was a very good team. At least with this strength, he could already sweep away all the paranormals in Japan. In addition, Abe Shizuku also controlled a considerable number of members, which meant that he had a strong right to speak in the parliament. The most important thing was that they didn't have military power in their hands. If their fists weren't hard enough, who would be willing to listen to you? For this reason, Mokizuk Baishui prepared 3 plans, each of which was carefully considered by him. During lunch, Yin Chiyue didn't come down to eat. It was Xiaoqing who sent it upstairs. After talking about business, it was private. Abe Shizuk couldn't help but ask Xiaoqing, "Why did you come to Japan?" Xiaoqing said with a serious face, "I came to travel, and then the ship broke down halfway, so I drifted here." Abe Shizuk didn't ask too much. After all, he knew that it was perfunctory. Xiaoqing wasn't going to tell him the real reason, so he didn't have to ask too much. But here came the problem. Yin Chiyue didn't come down to eat because of the drug problem. Mokizuk Baishui was very active, and he was seducing Xiaoqing the whole time. It was not easy for him to seize the opportunity when Yin Chiyue was not here. Naturally, he would do his best to make Xiaoqing feel helpless. For example, as soon as the dishes were served, Mokizuk Baishui knelt down and picked up this and that. After picking up the food, he put it into Xiaoqing's mouth. Xiaoqing certainly wouldn't open her mouth, and she looked at him expressionlessly. He silently retracted his chopsticks, then put the food in his mouth, and said with a seductive face, "Do you want to eat like this, master?" Xiaoqing couldn't kick him out because Dai had already made a move. She said helplessly, "Can't you be normal?" With Mokizuk Baishui causing trouble, the meal was very slow. After eating, Xiaoqing went upstairs to see if Yin Chiyue was eating well. As soon as Xiaoqing left, Abe Shizuk asked Mokizuk Baishui, "Do you like her?" Full Moon Whitewater didn't say anything. His expression said, "You can guess." But in his heart he didn't care. He felt that he was a person with strong control, especially when it came to his heart. How could he casually fall in love with someone? How could he casually hand over his heart to someone else? This was simply impossible. At most, he liked to tease Xiaoqing and watch Xiaoqing's face. However, Abe Shizuka felt that the onlooker could see more clearly. Mokizuk Baishui, Abe Shizuk Baishui, Shizuk Shizuk, Shizuk Shizuk. However, Abe Shizuk didn't enlighten him. Perhaps the bad taste was passed down in the family. On this point, the uncle and nephew were surprisingly in agreement. For example, Abe Shizuk was waiting to watch a show. After chatting, Abe Shizuk was about to leave. Mokizuk Baishui also fiddled around for a while, and then went to Xiaoqing's room. Xiaoqing was in the room thinking about what to do when the time came. She felt that she could bring Mikiko Ito there in advance, and let her see the situation, and then draw a map. With a map, they could safely evacuate when the time came. As she was thinking, someone knocked on the door. "Who is it?" "Come in, the door isn't locked." Xiaoqing answered and looked up. Then her jaw hit the ground. The person who came in was Mokizuk Baishui. He was only wearing a loose white shirt. The length of the shirt was limited, and could only cover his thighs. It covered his balls so that he wouldn't touch them. Chapter 469. Yin Chiyue crazily studied for a few days. Finally, he came out of the room with disheveled hair. "I did it." Xiaoqing didn't mind that he was dirty. She pinched his chin and gave him a kiss. Then, she quickly took the medicine and dragged Yin Chiyue to Dai. There were 2 kinds of medicine, oral and external. Xiaoqing violently broke in and took off Dai. She fed him the medicine and applied the medicine. Their efforts were not in vain. As soon as the medicine was applied, they could see that the strange energy that affected Dai's recovery was eroded little by little. At this speed, Dai would be completely recovered in 3 days. "Great!" Xiaoqing hugged Yin Chiyue's neck and kissed him. Then she hugged Dai and kissed him. Then, she pushed Yin Chiyue away and said with disgust, "Go take a shower. Your hair is oily." Yin Chiyue was speechless. She pulled up her pants and didn't recognize anyone. When Yin Chiyue went to take a shower, Mochizuki Shiroazuki came to find Xiaoqing and discuss with her what to do. Currently, Mochizuki Shiroazuki had asked people to spread the news that the explosion at Mount Fuji was caused by the anger of the gods. The gods were dissatisfied with the royal family. What he needed to do next was to cut off the royal family's wings step by step and replace them. And he only wanted Xiaoqing to do one thing, which was to get rid of Showa's secret weapon. His secret weapon was modified people. After modification, he didn't know if they should be called zombies or superpowered people. Mochizuki Shiroazuki was lucky enough to see them once, and he still couldn't forget them. After getting rid of this secret weapon, the rest would be easy. With Abe and Shizuke holding back the big boss, it would be easy to replace the boss. He had been secretly planning for a long time. Victory or defeat depended on this one move. Xiaoqing went alone. She didn't tell Yin Chiyue and the others what she was going to do. She just said that she had something to deal with, and that there was no danger. Then she left. Yin Chiyue wanted to follow her, but Xiaoqing rejected him on the grounds that he had to stay and observe Air Dai's situation and take care of them. Then, Xiaoqing left alone, bringing along a person who would show her the way. After solving the problem here, she took Air Dai and the others back and found a time to get married. Although he had never seen a woman marry two men at the same time, she was capable and willful. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Although they were the experimental subjects, the second batch, as guards, they cooperated with the researchers, research. And the modified people were the zombies, with Shizuki Shai Shishirozuki Shitsi, and after all, they and Sha Shizuki, Shizukukukuko. The base was not particularly confidential. At first, Showa believed in their strength, and was not worried that someone would come and cause trouble. Secondly, Showa had the final say in Japan. Shizuki Shizuki, sa shish. Therefore this base was basically half open. However, the place where this experimental base was located was quite remote. Within a radius of dozens of miles, there was no one. Even if something happened, as long as the transmission of information was blocked in time, no one would come over for a short period of time. Therefore, as long as she didn't let this group of people spread the news, she could kill everyone and leave without anyone noticing. Chapter 470. However, the possibility of that happening was quite small. After calculating the time it would take for reinforcements to arrive, Xiaoqing was relieved. If she moved faster, it would be safer. Then, Xiaoqing left the person who led the way and sneaked into the base. The base had a total of 3 floors, 2 on the surface and 1 underground. She wanted to kill the entire base without causing panic and leaking the news. If reinforcements came, she could only assassinate them in the early stages. After killing most of the important people, she would deal with those who did not have intelligence or had lower intelligence. Xiaoqing had a good plan. The moment she entered the base, she took out Qiutang and pinned it to her waist. The fragrance of Qiutang was very faint. Ordinary people would not notice it. It could silently lose its ability to move. It was a great help in assassination. Xiaoqing first went to the second floor. The second floor was the office building. All the higher-ups of the base were on the second floor. If she wanted to eliminate future troubles, she would not only have to kill all the modified people, but also the researchers and higher-ups. She would destroy all the information, so that this evil research could never be seen again. Actually, she was also worried that when Full Moon Whitewater came to power, he would restart this evil research. Therefore, it was safer to destroy the entire base. As long as the entire research base was destroyed, Full Moon Whitewater would not be able to restart this transformation project in a short period of time. Xiaoqing quickly sneaked into the first office. There were people in the office. It was a bald middle-aged man and a beautiful woman. The two of them were doing something that could not be described. Xiaoqing glanced at a certain part of the middle-aged man. Then, she had to admit that some rumors were quite true. For example, Japanese men were generally cough. She crouched on the roof beam with a dagger in her mouth. She lovingly waited for the two of them to finish before she quietly released Qiutang. Once Qiutang's scent made their entire bodies weak, Xiaoqing ended their lives. She then put the pair of lovebirds back in the same position they were in before she left. This way, if someone came over, they might look at the window and feel that they should not be disturbed, so they left. She was too quick-witted. Xiaoqing patrolled the second floor. Whenever someone was alone in the office, or there were not many people in the office, she would immediately use the Qiu Tang, which was even more effective than the knockout incense. Then he decisively killed them. After passing through several rooms, Xiaoqing rubbed his chin and counted the number of people he had killed. Then he returned to the first floor. Not only were there many staff members on the first floor, there were also girls posing for selfies. As long as she killed a person, she would immediately put that person in a position that would not be easily suspected, such as lying down to sleep or talking about love. Of course, the most important thing was that after killing everyone, she had to find the stairs or elevator to the basement. The key points were all in the basement. Starting from the first floor, she also began to encounter modified people. These modified people were all very ugly. They were already quite ugly, but when they were modified, their good-looking parts were removed, so they were even uglier. For example, she had seen modified people like this. Their entire right hand was replaced by a machine, and half of their face was rotten. Modified people were not easy to deal with. The Qiu Tang was ineffective against them. If she used real guns and bullets, she would be discovered if she made too much noise. When the time came, she would be surrounded once the alarm went out. The feeling of being surrounded was not good at all. It was difficult for two fists to fight against four hands. Even a random punch could kill an old master. Therefore, at the beginning she avoided them. When she found modified people, she would take a detour and kill the normal people first. Slowly, she realized that these modified people appeared in a pattern. These modified people seemed to be divided into small groups, patrolling around in groups. Xiaoqing was like Spider-Man. She hung on the ceiling and counted. There were 6 modified people in a group, and about 10 minutes later, there would be a group of modified people patrolling below. It was too crowded and not easy to deal with. She had to kill 6 modified people within 10 minutes. And she could not make a sound. This was simply too difficult. It was an impossible task, okay? Xiaoqing had a terrible headache. Then accidents always came so suddenly. She was thinking about how to deal with these groups of modified people. Suddenly, in a group of modified people, the one at the end of the group stopped and looked around in confusion. Finally, he raised his head. Xiaoqing secretly exclaimed. Then, she fell from the sky like a weight, smashing down with a thud. Then she smashed right on the head of the modified person. When she fell, the vines had already spread out and wrapped around the 6 of them at the fastest speed. When they wrapped around them, the first thing they bound was their mouths. No matter what, the most important thing was to not let them make a sound. Then, Xiaoqing quickly ended the life of the modified person at the end of the group. For safety reasons, she directly twisted the head of this modified person. As she expected, the remaining 5 people started to struggle. She did not have the ability to kill all of them in one go, so naturally she made a sound. She could even hear the sound of footsteps coming over. After Xiaoqing finished off the 5 modified people at the fastest speed, she quickly opened the window, hung herself out of the window, and closed the window again. Soon the sound of footsteps came closer. Someone discovered the corpse on the ground and sounded the alarm. After a while someone came over. That person said angrily, "Someone sneaked into the base, and you only found out now. A bunch of useless people. Hurry up and check around. The rest of you, follow me and search around. You must find that person." Soon, the sound of footsteps faded away. Xiaoqing did not go back through the window. Although the most dangerous place was the safest place, she still had other things to do. Xiaoqing climbed up to the second floor, found an open window, and went in. She didn't know if she was lucky or not, but the place she went in happened to be the place where she killed the first pair of adulterers. The moment she went in, she heard someone knocking on the door. She quickly hid behind the curtains and cursed her bad luck. It was bad enough that she found this house randomly, but there were still people coming over. She hid behind the curtains. If they forced the door open later, She would have no choice but to do so. Fortunately, luck was still on her side. Xiaoqing suddenly heard a voice outside the door. Damn! They're actually doing something in broad daylight. Forget it, forget it. Go to the next room. Don't disturb them. They will make things difficult for us. Chapter 471. After successfully dodging the attack, Xiaoqing crawled out from under the table. She sighed and glanced at the man and woman lying on the table. Then, she was blinded by the fat on the man's body. She covered her face and quietly crawled out. After being discovered, she had to be more careful with her actions. Otherwise, she would be inhumanely besieged. At that time, she would not be here to wipe out this base of androids. She would be here to deliver her life. She quietly planted daughter seeds all over the corridor. As long as someone passed by, the daughter seeds would be on their body. She could not rashly let the daughter seeds enter the bodies of those people, because it would be easy for them to be discovered. The daughter seeds stayed on the surface of their bodies and did not move at all. If there was a direct confrontation, they would grow out quickly like parasitic spores and interfere with the host. At the same time, Xiaoqing did a second more evil thing. She took out the pollen of the qiutong and soaked it in water. Then, she soaked the daughter seeds in the water as well. In other words, the daughter seeds all carried the poison of the qiutong. Although they were diluted with water, once someone was infected, they would slowly become powerless. This kind of powerlessness could not be felt during normal times. But when they were in a battle, they would realize that something was wrong. It could be said that Xiaoqing was extremely evil. After all, she was fighting a group of people alone. She had to be a little evil. After arranging everything, she began the massacre. This time it was a head-on massacre. As long as she found a patrol team that was alone, she would immediately attack and kill them. A patrol team of no more than 10 people was no different from delivering food to her. The average strength of those androids was above level 3, but what about Xiaoqing? She was only one step away from level 6. Killing a few level 3 and level 4 androids was not a problem at all. Even if these androids could not feel pain or fatigue, because their bodies had been modified, it was useless. Because she could kill them in an instant. Gradually, the people in the base of the androids realized that something was wrong. Some of the teams of androids that went out to patrol never returned. And it was not just one or two teams, but several teams of androids that had disappeared. And their numbers were increasing. The higher-ups immediately ordered the two modified teams to merge into one. Once they discovered any abnormalities, they were to report it immediately. Then, they discovered that many of the higher-ups had died in their rooms. An inexplicable panic spread throughout the base. They didn't know how many people had infiltrated the base, nor did they know what the other party's goal was. They only knew that their own people were dying. However, it was not convenient for them to request for help when they were not sure how many intruders there were. What if they requested help only to find out that there were only a few intruders? Wouldn't that be a slap in the face? It was only when nearly half of the cyborgs had mysteriously disappeared that the higher-ups finally couldn't help but send out a distress signal. As soon as she saw the distress signal, Xiaoqing immediately jumped up. She had to get rid of this group of people as soon as possible, and then quickly retreat. Otherwise, she would be surrounded like a dumpling. At this point, there was no need for her to hide anymore. She directly found a combined team of androids. The moment the battle began, she released Guangguang. Guangguang grew very luxuriantly. It was as tall as a 2-story building. As soon as it was released, it quickly took root and pierced through the floor. Its tentacles even extended to the first floor. Its crown also broke through the ceiling. The dense branches extended in all directions with an indescribable arrogance. Chapter 472. Anyone who was enveloped by the light, be it a normal person or a modified human, would be slowed down and fall into an illusion. Although the slow movement and the illusion would only last for a short period of time, and they would soon wake up, this short period of time was enough. The vines in Xiaoqing's hands quickly broke their necks. Those who were lucky enough to escape were also killed by Xiaoqing's knife and vines. More than a dozen cyborgs, under Xiaoqing's unreserved attacks, only lasted for less than a minute. The light was too big. Countless people rushed towards it. Xiaoqing stood under the tree, unmoving like a mountain. She was prepared to take on the entire base alone. Some people came faster and died earlier. They had just arrived in front of Xiaoqing and had not activated their abilities when small vines suddenly grew out of their bodies. The roots of the daughter quickly pierced into their flesh, carrying the poison of the autumn flowers. Then Xiaoqing made her move. When the higher-ups of the cyborg's base led the strongest team of cyborgs over, they only saw a tall tree, a beautiful woman standing under the tree, and corpses lying on the ground. The densely packed corpses made their scalps tingle. They had considered how many intruders there were, but they had never thought that there was only one. A woman. She stood on the spot and killed countless cyborgs. If someone had told them that someone had such an ability, they would have laughed at that person without reservation. How is that possible? How is that possible? Unless the other party was a god. But now the truth was in front of them. Xiaoqing pretentiously lit a cigarette and held it in her mouth. She looked at the people who were rushing over with a melancholy aura. Then she stretched out her hand. The vines clustered around her like living creatures. As soon as the battle began, they would quickly fly out to find their prey, tie them up, and pierce their skin with their thorns to inject venom into their bodies. Instead of saying that they were a bunch of vines, they were more like poisonous snakes in the plant world. The thorns were their fangs. The cyborgs that came this time were obviously stronger than the previous ones. At most, it would take Xiaoqing a little more effort to deal with them. There was nothing else. Xiaoqing commanded the little vines to kill the modified humans one after another. Her eyes were filled with pity. She really didn't know why there were people in this world who were willing to become modified humans, who didn't feel any pain, and didn't even have feelings. While she was struggling to find a way to turn back into a normal person, some people were willing to accept the transformation. Was strength really that important? Perhaps the ambition of those in power was more important. After killing a bunch of androids, Xiaoqing was a little dissatisfied. She took the initiative to go to the first floor. She started from the second floor and searched every room openly, trying not to leave anyone alive. After walking through the second floor, she went to the first floor. After walking through the first floor, she went underground. The underground of the base was a laboratory. There were many half-finished products lying on the operating table. Xiaoqing had to admit that it was disgusting. It was only when she arrived at the laboratory that she found out how the so-called modified humans were created. It was similar to the zombified mutants created by the demonic mercenary group. At least in principle, it was similar. They injected a very special drug into people who had been bitten, but had not turned into zombies. It would allow their bodies to maintain a certain level of rationality during the process of zombification. This level of rationality was very low, equivalent to a child of a few years old. Then, another drug was used to control them. Chapter 473. Of course, it was hard to find people who had been bitten, but hadn't turned into zombies. They caught ordinary people and let zombies bite them, then carried out the so-called transformation. As for the transformed people with superpowers, they were a little stronger than zombies because they were more rational. There were two kinds of transformed people with superpowers. One was to replace their limbs with machines, and the other was to transform them into zombies. The researchers in the base found that the reason why superpowered people couldn't be infected by zombies was that their cells had been mutated, and ordinary people were different. Once they were bitten or scratched by zombies, the infected cells would automatically necrotize and be expelled from the body. Therefore, superpowered people couldn't be infected. Therefore, they thought of another way, which was to let zombies infect ordinary people, then extract the infected cells from the ordinary people's bodies, and finally implant them into the bodies of superpowered people. The facts told them that this method could indeed infect superpowered people, And it would also retain some of the superpowered people's consciousness. At least, the superpowered people's fighting instincts could be preserved, as well as some judgment and cognition. The transformed superpowered people's fighting strength would be much higher than ordinary superpowered people. These were all discovered by Xiaoqing after going through the information stored in the base. While she was killing the androids, she was also searching for the research materials in the base. When the time came, she would destroy all the information. However, after getting the information, Xiaoqing changed her mind. She found that these people had taken her discovery to the wrong path. What if she changed her mind? For example, if she studied the cells of superpowered people and figured out why they were different, could she invent a drug to resist the zombie poison? Although Xiaoqing was now standing on the opposite side of human beings, because of what happened before, she still hoped that such a drug could be invented. When she went back, she could give the information to old Master Qin. She hoped it would be useful. After putting all the information into her space, Xiaoqing was like a barbaric bandit. She directly turned on the mode of killing without caring about burying, killing wherever she went. Those who blocked her way. Kill those who ran away. Catch up and kill those who formed a group to kill her. Kill him. In the beginning, the higher-ups of the base were still organizing people to try and kill Xiaoqing. Later on, they only cared about hiding their heads and running away. Then, they sent the cyborgs to their deaths to buy time and wait for reinforcements. However, no one could stop Xiaoqing's footsteps, not even for a moment. The higher-ups were dumbfounded. The base chief was more decisive. He gritted his teeth and ordered his subordinates, "Release 17396. His subordinate was dumbfounded. "But sir, number 17396 is only a half-finished product." The reason why it was said to be a semi-finished product was not because the modification had not been completed, but because it had not been implanted with something to control it. If it was released, no one knew what would happen. If it went crazy, even if the intruder was killed, they wouldn't be able to control 17396. The best result would be a lose-lose situation. "Didn't you hear? I said release it." The base chief gritted his teeth. His veins were bulging. The most important thing now was to kill this intruder. After the intruder was killed, reinforcements would arrive. By then, they would definitely be able to take down number 17396. His plan was very good. The other two hurriedly agreed and hurried to the deepest part of the base. Soon an angry roar was heard. This roar reverberated throughout the entire base. Even Xiaoqing heard it. She stopped in her tracks and pricked up her ears to listen carefully. Could it be that this group of people was going to use their ultimate move? She listened carefully for a while, but didn't find anything wrong. She didn't even hear the sound of someone approaching. She continued walking forward. After walking for a while, a group of people stumbled over. The leader was a human. He should be one of the higher-ups of the base. There were also a few people who were covered in blood and looked particularly miserable. That wasn't the main point. The main point was that the thing at the back was probably once a human. The reason why she said that it was probably once a human was because it didn't look like a human at all. Its huge body was like a giant gorilla. The surface of its bulging muscles was covered with a network of green blood vessels. There were traces of stitches around its waist. Its lower body looked like some kind of ape-like beast. One of its eyes had been dug out and replaced with an electronic eyeball. Its face was also densely covered with blood vessels. It could be vaguely seen that it used to be a very handsome man. Chapter 474. It probably still had some rationality. At the very least, it could tell who was the enemy. After glancing at Xiaoqing, it pounced on the higher-ups of the base, who were protected by the cyborgs. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. All the cyborgs who tried to stop it were torn apart alive. Xiaoqing even felt that she didn't need to do anything anymore. Xiaoqing took a step back. After absorbing the fresh blood, the tree became even more lush. She calmly used her vines to pull back the people who tried to escape. The cyborgs that stood out from the rest roared. Its voice was filled with gratitude. Then, it tore everyone into pieces and stepped on them. In the end, only a pile of meat was left. In the tunnel, countless daughter quietly took root and sprouted, searching for traces of the living. After confirming that no one was still alive, Xiaoqing prepared to leave. As for the cyborgs in front of her, it had nothing to do with her. Just as Xiaoqing was about to leave, the huge cyborg suddenly collapsed. At this moment, Xiaoqing realized that its back was full of holes. It seemed that many tubes had been inserted into it. Dark red blood kept seeping out of the holes. It fell to the ground and panted. When it raised its head to look at Xiaoqing, its eyes were full of pleading. However, it had lost the ability to speak and couldn't express its pleading. Xiaoqing stopped in front of it and looked at it struggling to gesture. In the end, she nodded. After seeing Xiaoqing nod, its eyes were filled with gratitude and relief. Then it used the last of its strength and tore its body apart. Its lower body, which was not inferior to its lower body, was torn off from the stitches. It was thrown far away. Only its upper body was left. No, it should be him. It tried its best to crawl in a direction. Xiaoqing followed behind it. Looking at the dark red bloodstains on the ground, there was an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was indeed seriously injured. However, as long as it left this place, found a place to hide, and slowly recovered, it could still live for a long time. However, it chose to die. It ended its own life. Xiaoqing guessed that he probably didn't want to live as such a monster. However, when Xiaoqing saw his destination, she realized that there was only one reason why he didn't want to live anymore. That was, there was no reason to live anymore. His lover was gone, and all his enemies were dead. What was the point of living? He might as well accompany his dead lover. Xiaoqing looked at the woman soaked in formalin and said softly, "Don't worry, I will bury you together." The man leaned against the glass and grinned. Xiaoqing broke the container and took out the woman's pale body. She handed it to the man. The man hugged his dead wife tightly. His eyes were full of satisfaction. If they couldn't be born together, then they would be in the same coffin. If there was a next life, he was willing to be her husband. After the men died, Xiaoqing wrapped their bodies in a quilt and quietly took them away. The reinforcements who came to support saw from afar that the entire base turned into a huge mushroom cloud and then disappeared from this world. When Zhao He heard the news, he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. The base of androids that he had spent so much effort to build was destroyed just like that. Those precious materials and researchers were also gone. This meant that if he wanted to build a second base of androids, he would have to start from scratch. It would be strange if he didn't go crazy with anger. On the other hand, Full Moon Whitewater was the opposite of him. Chapter 475. Mochizuki Whitewater's original plan was to let Xiaoqing explore first, then gather Abe Shizuyuki and his subordinates to destroy the base. But he didn't expect that Xiaoqing would give him such a big surprise. She directly destroyed the base by herself. Mochizuki Whitewater couldn't help but overturn his previous guess. Xiaoqing's strength was probably much stronger than he thought. This was an out-and-out surprise. After all, the stronger Xiaoqing was, the more help she would be to him. When Xiaoqing returned home, Erdai was lying on the sofa with ointment all over his back. Xiaoqing leaned over and kissed Erdai. Then she checked him. She found that the wound on Erdai's back had healed a little. It seemed that he would be fully recovered in a few days. "Why don't you go upstairs?" Xiaoqing touched Erdai's head. Erdai crawled forward and put his head on Xiaoqing's lap. Xiaoqing smiled and kissed the back of his head again. "I'll go take a shower first." Then, she went upstairs. When she walked to the bathroom door, she heard the sound of water and Yin Chiyue's seductive breathing. Xiaoqing was a little helpless and angry. She really hoped that Yin Chiyue's body could fully recover. She made him abstain for the sake of his health. But what about Yin Chiyue? She stood at the door for a long time. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Then the door opened. Yin Chiyue, wearing nothing, walked out with a towel wrapped around his waist. There were shallow wounds on his body. Obviously, he had just satisfied himself. Xiaoqing felt helpless. She was worried that she would hurt Yin Chiyue if she got too angry. So, she hurriedly walked around Yin Chiyue and went into the bathroom. Then, Yin Chiyue hugged her at the door. Yin Chiyue felt wronged. He kissed Xiaoqing's earlobe and whispered, "I didn't." Xiaoqing snorted and pinched the bruises on his waist. "Then what happened?" Yin Chiyue hurriedly said, "I hit the edge of the bathtub. Aching, although my body is mine, I'm only willing to let you touch me." Xiaoqing sighed. She hugged Yin Chiyue and kissed his forehead. Then she said, "Let's do it when we get home." That. She was talking about home in Jiangqing City. Yin Chiyue's eyes lit up. He quickly nodded and said shyly, "Then, let me scrub your back now." When the two came out of the bathtubs. When they came out of the bathtub's body, a certain faces was. And she was she's, he's was, s was b's get a's. Soon, she would be able to bring her friends, and the two at home back to China. They had already settled down in Jiangqing City. There were many of her friends there. She didn't have to worry about her identity being exposed. She didn't have to worry about food, shelter, and transportation. She had people who loved her by her side. A beautiful life was coming. Xiaoqing couldn't wait to go back. She missed little Bun Pan and the others very much. Except for the military, Xiaoqing didn't interfere in other aspects. She let Moon Whitewater and Abe Sherswa do it. Xiaoqing saw clearly that if the two of them joined hands, the country would be there sooner or later. The day before Moon Whitewater's huge plan was about to succeed, Xiaoqing found him and said straightforwardly, "I'm leaving. Prepare a boat for me." The smile on Moon Whitewater's face instantly froze. He only felt that the victory in front of him could no longer arouse his joy. Chapter 476. Xiaoqing was leaving. He had a premonition, but he didn't expect this day to come so quickly. He thought that at least Xiaoqing would see him succeed, see him sit in the supreme position, and then leave. At that time, he already had the ability to keep Xiaoqing. Why? Full Moon of Whitewater didn't understand. "I've been here for a long time, and it's already exceeded my expectations. My family is waiting for me at home. And here, you don't need my help anymore," Xiaoqing said lightly. Full Moon of Whitewater's face was a little pale. He was very arrogant. From the beginning, when he came to Xiaoqing's side, he was attracted to Xiaoqing. She was really a very special woman, different from all the women in Japan. He was deeply attracted to her every word, every action, and every action. At that time, Full Moon of Whitewater believed that he was only interested in Xiaoqing. He had never been unable to get what he wanted. Later, he gradually realized that he seemed to like Xiaoqing. He hesitated, but soon he was relieved. If he liked her, he would get her. Full Moon of Whitewater believed in his charm. When he lowered himself to chase a woman, no woman could reject him. But reality gave him a hard slap. Xiaoqing never cared about him, let alone liked him. Rejection after rejection made him feel lost, and at the same time, more and more unwilling. He cared more and more and liked her more and more. In the end, when Xiaoqing told him that she was leaving, Full Moon of Whitewater realized that he couldn't extricate himself. Why did he have to leave? He didn't mind that Xiaoqing had other people by her side, as long as she was willing to stay by his side. He was willing to give her everything, even if what Xiaoqing wanted was the supreme power. But obviously Xiaoqing didn't care about these things. Full Moon of Whitewater's face became paler and paler. He suddenly walked past Xiaoqing and closed the door. With his back against the door, there was a touch of weakness on his face. "Don't go. Don't go." Xiaoqing looked at Full Moon of Whitewater calmly. There was no emotion in her eyes. Full Moon of Whitewater took off his clothes one by one, until he was naked. "Whatever they can give you, I can. Whatever they can't give you, I can too." Moongazer Whitewater knelt at the feet of Xiaoqing in a devout manner, and kissed Xiaoqing's instep. "You're my master, and you'll be the master of this country in the future. Why don't you stay? I beg you." In the past, he had used a joking tone to tell Xiaoqing these things, but Xiaoqing knew very well that it was just a joke. But this time, his voice was trembling. His body was also trembling. His cheek was pressed tightly against her instep, transmitting this trembling from the bottom of his heart to her. Xiaoqing was very calm. When facing her lover, she could be very gentle. When facing unrelated people, her heart could be as hard as stone. She looked at full moon of white water without any fluctuation in her gaze. It was as if the person kneeling before her was not a living beauty, but a pink skeleton. You don't have to be like this. Soon the entire country will be yours. You can have any woman you want, Xiaoqing said softly. But I only want you. Full moon of white water hugged Xiaoqing's leg. His eyes were red and filled with stubbornness. He had always been willful since he was young. But there had never been anything that he wanted so desperately. But I don't want you. Xiaoqing stroked full moon of white water's head and said, Why do you have to degrade yourself? It's time for me to go. Full moon of white water hugged Xiaoqing's leg tightly and begged, Can you stay? I can give you anything you want. Look at your heart. Do you really love me? Xiaoqing smiled. There's no need to act like this. It's just a joke. She easily pushed full moon of white water away and opened the door. Just as Xiaoqing stepped out of the door, full moon of white water screamed at the top of his lungs. Go! If you go, I'll destroy this country. Don't you pity them? Don't you want the ordinary people to be saved? I'll destroy them. Xiaoqing's calm voice sounded. Up to you. She strode away without a trace of reluctance. Full moon of white water felt an indescribable despair. Why? Why couldn't she be gentler to him? Even 1% of the gentleness she showed to Air Dai and Yin Qiue would have been good enough. He sat on the ground paralyzed. He did not look like someone who was about to become a supreme ruler. He looked more like a clown trying to please the crowd. He exposed his ugliest, most unbearable, and most pitiful side to that person. But that person did not even bother to look back at him. So cruel. So hateful. Full moon of white water covered his face and curled into a ball. He knew that he could not keep her. He could not keep her. Chapter 477. The day Xiaoqing chose to leave was also the most critical day of Mochizuki Shiranui's plan. For some reason, Mochizuki Shiranui did not come to send Xiaoqing off. Only Ito Kumiko and Abe Shizuka came. The ship was prepared by Mochizuki Shiranui. There were several sailors on it. It was big and comfortable. When Xiaoqing took her two pets and Feng Lan to the ship, Ito Kumiko knelt there and kowtowed sincerely. She was grateful. If it were not for Xiaoqing, she might have died at sea. If it were not for Xiaoqing, even if she returned to Japan, she would struggle on the edge of death. She would never be able to live such a life. People should be grateful. Ito Kumiko was very satisfied. Let's go back. Before boarding the ship, Xiaoqing turned her head and waved at Ito Kumiko. She said to Abe Shizuku, I hope you can tell Mochizuki Shiranui. Forget it, that's it. She boarded the ship and waved her hand again, bidding farewell to the entire Japan. This country indeed gave her a very bad impression, but one thing could not be concealed. There were also some people who left a deep impression on her. For example, Abe Shizuku, Ito Kumiko, and Mochizuki Shiranui. Abe Shizuka gathered his sleeves and stood for a long time. When the ship became a small black dot, he said, She came. Why didn't she appear? Don't you want to say goodbye to her? Mochizuki Shiranui slowly walked out of the darkness. His eyes were red, but there were no tears. Because the tears had already flowed out last night. There's nothing to say. Mochizuki Shiranui's voice was a little hoarse. He stood there for a long time, looking at the direction where Xiaoqing and the others left. Finally, he lowered his head and slowly walked back. He had been abandoned by his master, although Xiaoqing had never admitted to being his master. In Full Moon Whitewater's life, which was full of twists and turns, but was completely under his control, Xiaoqing was like an accident that couldn't be controlled. She ruthlessly barged in and disrupted his orderly life. She forcefully pulled his heart out of his chest, but refused to take it away, and threw it back at his feet. After finishing everything, he clapped his hands and left. Full Moon of White Water felt that he hated Xiaoqing, hated her heartlessness. But Full Moon of Whitewater knew that as long as Xiaoqing nodded, he would be willing to leave everything behind. He would leave behind the glory and wealth at his fingertips and follow her, even if it was only as a slave. Sometimes, he despised his own inferiority, but he couldn't help but wonder how cruel that heartless woman was to not even give him a little bit of hope. After walking for a long time, Moongazer Whitewater stopped. He turned around and asked Makiko Ito, "How about we make a deal?" Makiko Ito looked at Moongazer Whitewater doubtfully. The pale and stubborn youth curved his lips and then said, "Be my imperial concubine in name." Probably in the whole country, besides Abe and Shizuka, only Makiko Ito would remember her. It didn't matter. He would treasure all the memories of her. All of them. As for what Xiaoqing wanted, he would do it. He would make the whole country orderly. Because this was what Xiaoqing wanted to see. Xiaoqing didn't know that there was a youth who was so desperate and helpless because of her departure. Even if she knew, she would only say that it was better to have a short pain than a long pain. Xiaoqing was a very strange person. She could be very gentle to the people she loved. It could be said that she was as gentle as water. But to the people she didn't love, she was ruthless to a terrible extent. Chapter 478. The former was represented by Air Dai and Yin Chiyue, while the latter was represented by Full Moon of Whitewater. No wonder someone asked her if she had a heart. Yes, she gave it to someone she cared about. As for who the person who asked her was, oh, she forgot. The person who would forget was definitely an unimportant person. The journey back was much smoother than when they came. Moreover, they had a boat, so they didn't need to care about the direction at all. They just needed to wait. Therefore, Xiaoqing's life became eating, sleeping, and talking about Yin Chiyue. After all, she was bored. Then while she was bored, she actually broke through. Originally, when she was destroying the base of the androids, she felt that she was about to break through. At that time, she was already on the verge of breaking through. However, there was no movement for a long time, so Xiaoqing let nature take its course. Unexpectedly, she broke through to level 6 while she was in a daze. The feeling of level 6 was completely different from the peak of level 5. She even felt that she could face the entire base of androids without a problem. That kind of breakthrough was a kind of suppression of the realm. Just like when she was level 5, she could fight a group of level 4 mutants alone. Now that she was level 6, she could easily fight a group of level 5 mutants alone. People were in high spirits when faced with happy events. Then there were 2 happy events. After a few days of wandering, they finally returned to the Celestial Empire. The moment she set foot on the land of her own country, her heart was in a mess. Xiaoqing only had one thought now. She wanted to go home. She wanted to go back to see her baby and her friends. When they were about to get off the boat, the helmsman stopped Xiaoqing and handed her a letter. It was said that it was from Full Moon of Whitewater. Then the helmsman returned. After watching the boat leave, Xiaoqing wanted to open the letter directly. However, the most important thing now was to send little brother Fenglan back. She first put the letter into the space and took little brother Fenglan back to the base where he lived. He even carried a tuna that was longer than a person. This fish was so big that it was probably enough for Fenglan's whole family to eat for half a month. When the time came, they could directly dry it into salted fish and eat it. Before they got close to the base, Xiaoqing sensed that something was wrong. She smelled the faint scent of blood. Xiaoqing immediately became alert. She made a hand gesture to signal Air Dai and the others to be careful. Then she slowly approached the base. As soon as they approached, Xiaoqing was shocked. The gate of the base was open, and the gatekeeper was lying in a pool of blood. She quickly led people into the base and saw that the street was in a mess, as if it had just been ransacked. Fenglan's face was pale. If it wasn't for Xiaoqing supporting him, his legs would have gone weak, and he wouldn't be able to stand up. I hear voices. Follow me. Xiaoqing led them to the square. When they got closer, they found that everyone was in the square. A group of people were holding guns, and some were empty-handed. They surrounded the people in the base. The people in the base were holding their heads and squatting on the open ground. There were several corpses in front of them. Xiaoqing hurriedly took her friends to hide. They had to observe the situation first before making a decision and taking the next step. Someone was counting. After that, he said to a man who looked like a leader, "There are 123 people in total. There are not many women, only 44. Boss, what should we do?" The leader waved his hand and said, "Keep the women, kill the men. Also, pay attention to the good-looking men. The old ones are a waste of food. Kill them all." The man who was counting immediately asked, "What about the children?" Chapter 479. Children can't be played with. Fortunately, their meat is tender. It's like cooking them after they die. Someone immediately said with a sinister smile. Third brother is right. Let's kill all the men first. Since this place is near the sea, we don't lack salt. We can make them into jerky and store them. We won't have to worry about food for a while. The leader touched his chin and said. Feng Lan immediately saw Feng Yu, who was protecting a few children. He was anxious. If Xiaoqing hadn't held him back, he would have already rushed out. Don't be impulsive, Xiaoqing said calmly. Leave it to me. Feng Lan clenched his fists tightly and nodded. Xiaoqing looked at the direction of the wind and scattered the daughter seeds first. She was afraid that when a fight broke out, some people would go crazy and kill ordinary people first. They had to guard against this. After all, Feng Lan's elder sister, Feng Yu, and his younger brothers and sisters were in the crowd. The leader was about to give the order when he suddenly smelled a faint fragrance. He turned around and saw his subordinates looking up in shock. Their jaws were about to fall off as they looked behind him. The leader followed his gaze and saw a big tree appear out of thin air behind him. It was still growing slowly. The huge crown of the tree covered the sky and stretched its branches wantonly. Bits of light fell down and landed on the tip of his nose. It was a little itchy. What was this? Just when the leader was a little confused, he suddenly heard a scream. Warm blood splashed on his face, and the leader was so scared that he subconsciously activated his ability. He saw that vines had drilled out from under the tree and dragged one of his men under the tree. After his subordinate was dragged under the tree, he was directly dismembered by many vines. The pieces of his corpse were dragged under the tree by the vines and turned into nutrients. The tree's roots quickly drilled out from the ground and pierced into the nutrients, absorbing the rich nutrients. The leader didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the branches and leaves of this tree were more luxuriant. The branches and leaves moved without wind, and the rustling sound seemed to be expressing its joy. While he was still in shock, more and more people were dragged under the tree and turned into nourishment for the tree. He wanted to shout for the enemy to attack and get everyone to prepare for battle, but no sound came out of his mouth. His throat was blocked by something. The last thing his subordinates saw was the leader opening his mouth, and green leaves and sprouts were scrambling to crawl out of his throat. Then there was no then. Xiaoqing clapped her hands and stood out from the dark. Except for a man who had already peed in his pants, everyone else had already become Light's nourishment. The man was really scared to the point of peeing. The yellow liquid flowed down his crotch and dripped to the ground. His hand was still holding the gun, but the gun in his hand had already fallen to the ground with the yellow liquid. Xiaoqing flung out her vines and dragged him over. Then, she hung him a little distance away from her in disgust. She was going to ask him about it after cleaning up the scene. As soon as the battle was over, Feng Lan was the first to rush into the crowd and hug Feng Yu. Sister, are you okay? Feng Yu was really scared to death. She turned around and hugged Feng Lan, crying bitterly. As soon as she cried, the children cried as well. The whole square was filled with crying. After all, after this group of people had built this small base, they had been living in peace on this coast. There was nothing nearby that was worth fighting over, so it had been very peaceful. They didn't expect that a group of robbers would suddenly come today. They burned, killed, and robbed, and even wanted to turn them into food reserves. If Xiaoqing hadn't stopped that group of robbers in time, the women would have been raped, and the men would have become jerky that was about to be pickled. After surviving a disaster, it was really a feeling of not being able to cry out loud. Some people cried because their family members had died. When this group of robbers entered the city, they had resisted stubbornly, and many people had died in the resistance. Feng Lan had seen the world, so she was calmer. After comforting Feng Yu, she began to arrange for people to clean up the scene. Xiaoqing was still carrying the tuna on her shoulder. She asked kindly, "Who are you? Why did you come here? What do you want to do?" The man was trembling, let alone talking. His whole body was shaking like he had Parkinson's disease. Xiaoqing said patiently, "I'll give you 3 seconds to calm down, and then tell me what you need to say. Of course, you can refuse, but I don't think you want to experience the consequences." The man trembled and quickly shouted, "We are robbers. A zombie tide broke out inland, and everywhere is chaotic. We have no choice but to come to the coast." Xiaoqing's face turned cold. "What happened?" Chapter 480. Xiaoqing didn't care about the stinky smell of the captive anymore. She dragged him over with the vines and asked him coldly, "What happened?" "I don't know, I really don't know. There was a sudden outbreak of zombies. Everything was in chaos. Many bases were attacked by zombies. Now there are almost no small bases left. Many bases have merged together. We are all robbers. We are the kind that are registered in the bases. We don't dare to join any of the bases. We can only run to the coastal area." The captive cried. His boss was unlucky this year. She chose a base that had a strong backer. Damn! She bumped into the muzzle of the enemy's gun. She was wiped out by the enemy and turned into fertilizer. His words were too vague. Xiaoqing couldn't judge whether Little Bun and the others were safe or not. Xiaoqing immediately threw the captive aside and said to Feng Lan, "I have to go. Take these. If you can't do it, go to Jiang City and join me." But there are no living people in Jiang City. She took out a bunch of food from her space and stuffed them all into Feng Lan's hands. Then, she took her 2 pets and went back home. Xiaoqing didn't have time to care about the base. Her mind was full of Little Bun and the others. She was panicking. Yin Qiue quickly comforted her. "It will be fine. Don't forget that Jiang City is a zombie city. Even if there is a zombie outbreak, Jiang City will be fine." Xiaoqing was worried. After being comforted by Yin Qiue, she was a little relieved. After all, it was useless to be worried. Even if something really happened, she had to calm down and deal with it. Because of her concern, Xiaoqing and the others walked for 2 days and 1 day. But at night, they still had to stop and rest. Because even if Xiaoqing and Air Dai were zombies and wouldn't be tired or hurt, Yin Qiue was a normal person. After stopping, Air Dai went to hunt. Yin Qiue was in charge of setting up the tent. Xiaoqing sat in the same place and opened the letter that Full Moon of White Water left for her. During the day, her heart was filled with thoughts of her son and her friends. She had completely forgotten about the letter. Now that she had stopped to rest, she remembered it again. When Xiaoqing opened the letter, Yin Qiue was setting up the tent and peeking. After all, it was a letter from his rival. He had to read it clearly. "Know yourself and know your enemy. You will never be defeated." Xiaoqing opened the letter and was stunned. "My master, you must have reached the other side of the sea. When you set your feet tstes. When you set foots tstes. SSTSSTSTST. I. TTSTSSS. Really TTTSTS. Of course est. I'll do everything you want me to do. When the whole island becomes what you imagined, will you come back to see me? Yes. Please let me deceive myself. At least I'll have a goal." When you reach the other continent, it'll probably be the time for me to determine success or failure. My queen, no matter what, please don't forget me. The signature was Full Moon of White Water's handprint. It looked like a slave contract. After Xiaoqing read it, she had an indescribable feeling. She was too cruel to Full Moon of White Water, but she didn't regret it. Xiaoqing already had a partner that she could spend the rest of her life with, so there was no need to give Mochizuki Whitewater any hope. It was better to cut the pain short than to prolong the pain. If she gave him hope and made him despair, she might as well cut off all his thoughts from the beginning. Chapter 481. Besides, one pervert like Yin Chiyue was enough. She wouldn't be able to take it if there were more. Before Xiaoqing finished thinking, Yin Chiyue stuck close to her and complained, "Ah Qing, why are you so good at attracting bees and butterflies?" Another one. After saying that, he secretly took out the letter. No, it should be said that he took out the letter openly and said, "I'll take care of this." He had already thought of 100 ways to deal with it. He would cut it into pieces, burn it to ashes and scatter it in the river or the sea. In short, it would be fine as long as Xiaoqing never saw it again. She was already so far away. He was still coveting his wife. How shameless was he? My queen, she's obviously his. She was Yin Chiyue's queen. Fortunately, Xiaoqing didn't treat Full Moon of Whitewater well. He knew that his intuition told him that Full Moon of Whitewater wasn't a good person. Xiaoqing helplessly let go. Okay. You deal with it. She didn't want to attract bees and butterflies, but the heavens were jealous of her beauty. Sigh. She seemed to have been infected by something. After getting the right to deal with his love rival's letter, Yin Chiyue was obviously in a better mood. He quickly set up the tent and took the letter to destroy it. Xiaoqing sat there holding her chin. She calmly compared Full Moon of Whitewater and Yin Chiyue. From appearance to figure to personality, her Yin Chiyue was indeed cuter. Especially when they were doing that. Xiaoqing had to admit that ever since she became Yin Chiyue's lover, she had gradually turned into a masochist who only waved her whip at Yin Chiyue. Especially after reading a lot of books, Xiaoqing found that masochists actually yearned to be treated like that. Whether physically or mentally, the more painful it was, the more excited they were. In other words, if Xiaoqing wanted to be a qualified lover, she couldn't be soft-hearted when it came to Yin Chiyue. If it weren't for the fact that she had more important things to do, Xiaoqing really wanted to put the theory she had just learned into practice. Erdai soon brought the prey back. After eating and drinking, Xiaoqing went to sleep with 2 women in his arms. The sky had just brightened when she brought the 2 of them on the road. Just like that, they rushed for a few days. As they gradually entered the inland, they realized that the captive's words were too light. The entire celestial empire was in chaos. Not long ago, some zombies disguised as humans sneaked into a base. Then, overnight, all the ordinary people in the base were infected. The zombies that sneaked into the base cooperated with the zombies outside and broke through the entire base. The consequences could be imagined. The human base was in an uproar. Although Xiaoqing was different from ordinary zombies were still very different from human beings. Therefore, no one thought that zombies could sneak into human bases until it really happened. After the tragedy in this base, all the bases began to be on high alert. The checks for entering and exiting became extremely strict. If unfamiliar survivors wanted to enter the base, they had to go through more than a dozen checks. Once a strange person was found, they would be caught without hesitation. They would rather catch the wrong person than let them go. However, under such circumstances, there was still another base that followed in the footsteps of the previous base. Because the zombies that sneaked into the base had a special ability, hallucination. At that time, people realized that zombies had unknowingly evolved to a very scary level. Chapter 482. Originally, zombies were no longer the most terrible enemy of human beings, especially after paranormals evolved to a high degree. They even began to clean up the cities that had been occupied by zombies, trying to return to the cities. Then zombies gave them a vivid lesson. In just half a month, 3 bases had fallen. Except for the few survivors, the rest of the people in the bases had become zombies' food. Through the descriptions of the survivors, people discovered that there were not only evolved zombies that looked very similar to humans, but there were also zombies with superpowers. There was also a very common phenomenon, which was that zombies had a very high IQ. This was very bad news for human beings, but it was just the beginning. Not long after, the cities that had been cleaned up began to rebound. The zombie king led the zombies to surround those cities, launching a wave of zombies. Their purpose was very clear, which was to take back those cities. The whole country was in chaos, and even the capital was not spared. Xiaoqing witnessed the chaos. Just like at the beginning of the apocalypse, people who had lost their homes had to gather in groups to guard against zombies and move aimlessly. They either found a large base that could accommodate them and stayed after going through many inspections, or they were ambushed by zombies halfway and became zombies' food. Too many people were displaced, and more bases did not dare to accept them, because there was a precedent of zombies mixing in with the refugees. The bases were like birds that were startled by the twang of a bow, and even the slightest movement could scare them into hiding in their shells. That made it even more difficult for the refugees to find a place to stay. Xiaoqing and the others had tried to find a base to inquire about the situation, but they gave up directly after looking at the inspection process. The first inspection was to enter a secret room and strip naked for a full-body inspection. It was not only troublesome, but also unacceptable. At least, Xiaoqing did not want to be inspected like pigs or cows waiting to be slaughtered. Therefore, they became refugees through the channel to get information. Most of the refugees went to the capital, because the capital at least would not be like most of the bases now, which directly refused outsiders to become members of the base. Although the inspection process was just as troublesome, or even more troublesome, as long as there was a place to stay, they would be satisfied. After collecting some information, Xiaoqing was relieved. At least, as a zombie city, nothing would happen to Jiang City, unless there was another wave of zombies coming to take over the territory. But was Yi easy to bully? Come to take over the territory? If they were not careful, they would become food. Therefore, Xiaoqing was not worried about them. Looking at the current situation of the Celestial Empire, Xiaoqing's entire person was somewhat unwell. When she was setting up camp at night, she would flip over and over in her mind. On one hand, she felt that she should not meddle in other people's business. After all, she could not bear to see those innocent people become zombies' food. She thought further ahead. The apocalypse had to come to an end. She really wanted to return to the peaceful era before the apocalypse, not for herself, but for the next generation, for little Bun. Xiaoqing was already used to the apocalypse. It could even be said that she was like a fish in water. However, little Bun was different. He was still a child and needed a stable learning environment. He needed to live a normal life. The apocalypse could not give him these things. Xiaoqing always believed that the apocalypse was a disaster, and all disasters would come to an end. The apocalypse was the same. It would come to an end one day. She could be the push for the arrival of this day. It would be good to be one day earlier. Xiaoqing did not want little Bao to grow up and tell her, "Mommy, my biggest wish is to see the sun and the blue sky." Er Dai and Yin Chiyue could see that she was absent-minded. Er Dai could not say anything. He could only hug her tightly and comfort her with actions. Yin Chiyue could do more things. For example, when she was thinking about something very complicated, he could remind her, "Do whatever you want, because no matter what you choose, we will support you." Xiaoqing was the backbone of the two of them, Pan Pan and the others. Yin Chiyue believed that as long as Xiaoqing said one word, even if it was against the whole human race, the group of friends would not oppose. Xiaoqing did not say anything in the end. After rushing for more than 10 days, they finally returned to Jiang City. Chapter 483. Jiang City looked as peaceful as ever, but the originally clean city walls were suddenly covered with red thorns. These thorns were actually dark red in color. If one didn't look carefully, they would only think that they were black. Only when they were reflected by the sunlight would they realize that the dark red color was like dried blood. It looked a little creepy. There were zombies and mutated animals tied up in some places. indicating that these thorns weren't as harmless as they looked. A few nimble zombies were getting the zombies and mutated animals trapped on the thorns down. The zombies were better off. After all, the blood in their bodies was almost dried up. The mutated animals were more pitiful. They were tightly tied up, and the thorns pierced into their bodies and sucked their blood. After sucking the blood, the thorns looked a lot brighter. Some of the thorns even had small buds hanging on them. It seemed to have changed a lot. When Xiaoqing reached the door, a small gust of wind rushed in and bumped into her arms. "Mama!" Xiaoqing picked up the little bun. Her heart was sour and bitter. "Baby, I'm back, baby." There was a group of people behind the little bun. They all ran out with the little bun. Early in the morning, the little bun didn't run out to play or be naughty. He just sat by the window and rested his chin on his hand, looking out of the city. When someone asked him, he said that he had a feeling that his mama was coming back. Others didn't believe him, but Gu Panpan and the others believed him. Each one was more excited and nervous than the other. When the little bun rushed out, they rushed out as well. The little girl zombie, who had been raised well by the little bun, also followed them out. In the end, she saw Xiaoqing at a glance. The little girl zombie was speechless. Her mother-in-law was actually the powerful zombie that almost killed her. Zombie birth pill. "Mama, baby missed you so much." The little bun pitifully whined in Xiaoqing's arms, his big eyes filled with tears. Xiaoqing's heart ached. She hugged him tightly and quickly swore, "Baby, don't worry. Mama won't leave you alone again, okay?" "Yes." The little bun snuggled into Xiaoqing's arms. After a while, he suddenly remembered that he hadn't shown his new wife to his mother yet. Even an ugly daughter-in-law had to see her parents-in-law. Not to mention that his little wife was quite cute. Little Baozi immediately turned around and waved his hand. "Wife, come and see my mama." When Xiaoqing heard this, she was angry. Who took advantage of her absence to seduce her son? Did he want to die? Her son was so young, yet she dared to seduce him. The above was Granny Xiao, who was already speaking incoherently. The little girl zombie who was about to sneak away, but was called out, was speechless. Her life was still in Little Bun's hands, so she could only pitifully turn around and walk towards Little Bun. Xiaoqing looked at the culprit who seduced her son. Oh, it looked familiar. She looked again. Wasn't it the zombie that injured Dai? She had actually become her daughter-in-law. Did she ask for her mother-in-law's opinion? Xiaoqing was so angry that she temporarily ignored her companions. She stared at the little zombie girl and asked, "What's going on?" The little bun quickly described the process of how he caught her. Then, he told her that he was short of one person to play fight the landlord. So he kept her to play the role of his new wife. Xiaoqing was speechless. Her son really knew how to pick things up. If she knew that her son was this zombie's nemesis, she would have done it herself. After communicating with Xiaoqing, and knowing that the little girl zombie had been restrained and wouldn't betray her, Xiaoqing allowed her son to have one more toy. Chapter 484. She held her son's hand and walked towards her friends. "I'm back. Sister Qing." Gu Panpan covered her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. She had rarely been separated from Xiaoqing for so long and so far. In fact, there were some people in the crowd who were even more excited, but they didn't show it. For example, Yan Hanqing said calmly, "Let's go home first. Breakfast is ready. We'll talk after breakfast." "Okay." Xiaoqing held Little Bao's hand and walked into Jiang City. However, when she turned around, she saw that Yan Hanqing's eyes were a little red. While having breakfast, Xiaoqing learned about the current situation in Jiang City. The thorns on the city wall were found by Yan Hanqing and Yin Yi. They found them in the depths of a large forest. Since the outbreak of the zombie tide not long ago, Jiang City had been harassed by the same kind of zombies. It seemed that there were other kinds of zombies secretly coveting Jiang City. Therefore, they went to find these ghost thorns, nicknamed vampires, and planted them on the city wall. Those who didn't go through the main gate were all hung up. Through her friends, Xiaoqing also learned that the situation in China was very serious, but it had been contained to a certain extent. At least, There were no more zombies sneaking into the survivors' bases. Many bases had joined hands to form teams of paranormals to resist the zombie tide. Hearing this, Xiaoqing felt a lot more at ease. She was not a savior who could save the world. Now that the situation outside was slowly improving, she could close the door and live her own life without any psychological burden. On the first day back home, Dai and Yin Qiyue were kicked out of the room. Little Bao successfully took over half of Xiaoqing's bed. Poor Dai and Yin Qiyue had to sleep in another room with their quilts. There were many people who couldn't sleep tonight, including Xiaoqing, who was hugging the little bun, Yin Qiyue, who had just returned home and was not used to it, and Yin Hanqing. He was a little panicked. In the past, although Dai and Yin Qiyue were very close to Xiaoqing, he wasn't afraid because in Xiaoqing's eyes, they were the same as him. However, this time, Yin Hanqing found that the atmosphere between Dai, Yin Qiyue and Xiaoqing had changed. No one could get in between them. Sometimes the pink bubbles that came out of nowhere were sweet. He felt that something was wrong, so he had to think of the worst-case scenario. Did Yin Qiyue confess? And Xiaoqing accepted it? If that was the case, he really didn't have a chance. Yin Hanqing tried hard to suppress the panic in his heart. He became one of the people who couldn't sleep. Because they couldn't sleep that night, everyone woke up early the next day. When Xiaoqing got out of bed, many people were still sleeping. She took little Bao to the bathroom to wash her face and brush her teeth. She found Yin Hanqing inside. Yin Hanqing had just washed his face, and there were still water droplets on his temples. When he saw Xiaoqing, his gaze became much gentler. Morning. Morning. Xiaoqing held little Bao while Yin Hanqing took a small stool from the side and put it under little Bao's feet. At a glance, they really looked like a family of three. After little Bao stepped on the stool, he began to skillfully squeeze toothpaste and brush his teeth. Xiaoqing stood beside little Bao. Yin Hanqing was about to leave, but he stopped. He stood at the door and watched this warm scene for a long time. When Xiaoqing looked at him in confusion, he asked calmly, "What do you want to eat for breakfast?" "I'll make it." You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.